Light and shadow braided through the great hall. Amid the soft murmur of students, Professor Flitwick was outlining the key points of the recent duel to the younger pupils. Rhythm. You might think that's a vague concept, but in this exercise, Professor Snape showed precisely why rhythm matters. The opening rush was an offensive rhythm started by Professor Black. Snape resisted and steered the duel into the tempo he expected. That pushed them to a standstill. Professor Black had no choice but to get bogged down. Unless someone's life is at stake, I don't recommend imitating Black's last desperate move. It was impulsive and foolish. Loren lingered on the edge of the crowd, listening. He tilted his head and saw Professor Snape slip quietly out by a side door. Snape's robes whipped around him as he walked fast. He strode into the headmaster's office with a grim expression, anger renewed. He doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve it. He doesn't deserve to be a professor at all. Dumbledore, in a loose off-white robe that matched his beard under the slightly yellow light, looked up from behind his desk. A cup of hot cocoa steamed on the table. Severus, he said gently. You haven't given a name, but I suspect whom you're referring to. Don't say his name, Snape snarled. Dumbledore sighed and pushed the cocoa toward him while pouring himself a cup of tea. Have some. It might help you regain your composure. I don't need it. Snape met those calm, deep blue eyes. After a beat, his anger having little effect, he took the cup. The cocoa was cloying, sickly sweet, thick, sliding down his throat with a lingering warmth that settled in his chest. Dumbledore smiled. Would you like to tell me what happened? Snape hesitated. The duel. Tonight's duel. I should have cut him open, right there in front of everyone. See if an animagus returns to his human form when split. He spat through clenched teeth. On a shelf, a glass bottle rattled. The insects inside shivered. Calm down, calm down. You're frightening our little guests. Dumbledore flicked his wand and the beetles stilled. Snape snorted. You should hate him. Years ago he told you that by poking the knot in the tree trunk with a long stick, you could get into that house. If he'd never said that, Harry's father might have saved you. Perhaps none of what followed would have happened. Of course I should hate him. Not only him, but that damned werewolf and that arrogant, undisciplined, attention-seeking, insolent James Potter. Do you think they were good people? Dumbledore sipped his tea as if he hadn't heard. You didn't go through with it, did you? Severus, you know what that means. What does it mean? Dumbledore let a small smile play about his mouth and said nothing. I knew it from the moment you came to me years ago and promised to protect Harry. Don't say it. You swore an oath, Dumbledore. Only you and I know. A haze clouded Snape's eyes. Too much had happened tonight, and old memories stirred restlessly. Dumbledore paused, then continued softly. When you asked me back then to promise, to keep some part of you hidden, it made me even more certain. Love has changed you, Severus. Love? Snape lifted an eyebrow and laughed without humor. A ridiculous word, Dumbledore. You still believe in your so-called power of love. Dumbledore only smiled. Severus, ever since you handed Sectum Sempra to Loren, telling him it was a charm for processing ingredients, can you still use it to cut living flesh without hesitation? Not long ago, I used it to tear a 40-foot basilisk to pieces, Snape sneered. So why tonight? Why didn't I cut Black open? Dumbledore sounded oddly pleased as he watched Snape struggle. Snape's voice remained hard. The blade of Sectum Sempra is too keen. I didn't want to kill him outright. That would have stained the great hall where we eat. Kill him, Dumbledore murmured. Such an act would have torn your soul, Diffindo. Snape's gaze shifted, and for a moment the fire in him cooled. Sirius, the Dementor must have affected him deeply. Years in Azkaban changed him, made his emotions brittle, prone to reckless acts. It comes from his hot temper and impulsiveness. Dumbledore's words unlocked something in Severus, and the old memories rose, layer upon layer, until they broke the surface all at once. It was like a corpse floating up from the deep, the sound of water in his ears clarifying into voices. This is true, isn't it? Not a lie? Petunia said you were lying, that Hogwarts wasn't real. This is true, right? The letter, an owl really delivered it? Severus, tell me about the Dementor. The first fragile exchanges with Lily before she knew Hogwarts. We're best friends, Severus, but I don't like the people you spend time with. What do you see in him? That's the dark arts. If you think that's amusing. Their happier years at school. Let him go. But you're a proud, rude bully to the weak Potter. Let him go. Lily defending him, one of the few things from which he drew solace. And then that night when, in a fury, he had said the unforgivable thing. Muggle. From now on, I won't concern myself with this. Snivelous. No need to apologize. I'm not interested. Save your breath. You didn't call me a Muggle on purpose, but you do call people of my background Muggle, Severus. How am I different? Snape drained the now lukewarm cocoa. The syrupy liquid had thickened and left his throat raw. I'm not saying he had no excuse. If you want, you can speak to Sirius, or you can punch him in the next duel. That is your choice, Severus. And if Harry comes to you to learn occlumency, Dumbledore said at last, meeting Snape's eyes, I would ask you to help him. The March weather was finally warming. Easter holiday countdown, 2 more days. Loren, clutching his potions textbook, and Hermione squeezed into the dungeon classroom. Today was Thursday. The dueling class had been last night. By the end of Friday, the Easter break would officially begin. Hogwarts students weren't allowed to leave during the holiday, but free days were always something to look forward to. Professor Black was still in the hospital wing, recovering. He hadn't been cut by Sectum Sempra, but a combination of repeated knockback jinxes and one powerful blow that sent him into the solid wall of the Great Hall had left many of his bones badly damaged. For a wizard, the injuries weren't fatal, but they were awkward. Because he'd been hit in his animagus form, some fragments had ended up in odd places when he shifted back to human. Fortunately, Professor Snape had won the duel without serious injury. If he hadn't, the potions master would be the one in the hospital wing now, and today's class would have been canceled. This was a practical potions lesson, and they had to work in groups to brew a swelling solution. The instructions read, add 2 scoops of dried nettles and 3 pufferfish eyes into a mortar and grind to a medium-fine powder. Add the powder to the cauldron and heat at medium for 20 seconds. Wave your wand to activate the magic in the ingredients. Then add dew collected last autumn and brew for 60 minutes. Time varies with cauldron type. Add 1 bat spleen and stir 4 times counterclockwise. After simmering at low heat for 30 seconds, wave your wand to contain the magic and the potion is done. The process was a little tedious but not difficult. The students clustered around their cauldrons in small groups, chatting naturally about last night's duel. Professor Snape's casting speed was unreal. Yeah. Even compared to Professor Flitwick's charms, he's fast. It wasn't only Slytherins who felt that way. Many Gryffindors who'd watched the duel admitted they'd been impressed. Loren, Seamus, Dean, and the others pointed out highlights, controlling the pace of the fight, how to deal with charms. Loren did most of the talking, while Seamus and Dean nodded. Snape looks malnourished and weak, but I didn't expect him to be so agile, Seamus said. The rapid volley of charms at the end was brilliant. My impression of him's changed, another agreed. Harry bristled and couldn't help defending Sirius. Sirius was careless, that's all. He almost went straight for that old bat. Sk, Draco scoffed. Don't forget what Professor Flitwick said in his commentary. That was reckless. If Snape had replied to the knockback with something stronger, Black wouldn't be in the hospital wing now. He'd be in a coffin. This time, Draco wasn't posturing to fit in. He really disliked Sirius and hated Harry's attempts to downplay it. Over the next few minutes, Harry argued with a cluster of Slytherins by himself. Ron and Seamus tried to help, but Snape's victory was an indisputable fact and the Slytherins had the upper hand. Only Harry kept going. Hermione tugged on his sleeve, but he didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on refuting them. From the side, Loren watched the commotion with an amused smile. Hermione nudged his arm. Aren't we going to stop him? Loren waved his hands. Why? As long as they don't start a fight, a bit of shouting's fine. Hermione felt foolish for letting him have a point. The insults were flying, one side calling Snape old bat, the other answering with jibes about Sirius being a smelly black dog. Hogwarts students could be surprisingly coarse. Harry realized he was losing the argument and in a last burst threw down a challenge. What's the point of arguing? Next dueling class. Malfoy, I'll duel you one-on-one. Do you dare? Draco, who had been told by his father to avoid attention, nonetheless wanted the match. It's on, he said, chin up. And don't go running off like your godfather, Potter. Harry's temper flared and another insult slipped out. The classroom went suddenly quiet at the sound of heavy, hard-soled footsteps. Professor Snape had entered. His face was expressionless. The Gryffindors all dropped their eyes and stayed silent. Loren watched him closely, not just to see whether he was injured, but to study his mood. Snape's hair was still greasy and he walked normally, no limp, so he was clearly uninjured. His eyes were cold and his face impassive. Oddly, the dark circles under them looked a little lighter than usual, as if the duel had done him some good. Hermione kept her head down, fingers worrying the edge of a parchment, already calculating house cup points. Slytherin had originally been 50 points ahead, then Gryffindor had gained 300 for the basilisk incident, leaving a 250-point lead. Snape had clawed back 200 of that through his penalties and things like today's. If Slytherin won the Quidditch Cup and Snape kept deducting at the same rate, plus whatever Harry might lose, her eyebrows knit. She could only hope Slytherin lost the Quidditch match. The Slytherins beamed as Snape addressed the room. "Potter," he said in that drawl, "let us tally your achievements. Troll, Quirrell, Basilisk, do you think you've achieved something extraordinary?" "No, sir," Harry replied. Snape sneered. "You think you deserve your so-called fame, do you?" "No, sir," Harry insisted. "Last potions class I fully explained the swelling solution." Snape's next prompt came cold. "Potter, tell me, what ingredients are needed to brew a swelling solution?" A murmur went through the classroom. This was like their first-year potions roll call. "Bat spleen, pufferfish eyes." Harry hesitated. He couldn't remember the last item clearly. Hermione and Ron whispered reminders, but with Snape's presence, their whispers were barely audible. Snape continued, "And what is the purpose of the 2 wand movements during the brewing?" Harry had no answer. He confessed, "I don't know, sir." Points were going to go. He stared defiantly at Snape, deciding to get it over with. Snape blinked then, almost casually, said, "Potter, for insulting a professor, Gryffindor will lose 50 points." He turned to Draco. "Malfoy, tell the class the answer to Potter's question." Draco's face split into a triumphant smile. "Swelling solution requires dried nettles, pufferfish eyes, and bat spleen. The first wand movement activates the magic in the ingredients. The second calms and stabilizes it." "Excellent," Snape said. "Slytherin gains 5 points." Hermione's face fell. Gryffindor minus a 50, Slytherin plus 5, a swing of 55 points. For the rest of the lesson, she kept a hawk eye on Harry, terrified he'd do anything else to give Snape an excuse. "Stop staring," Loren said, reaching over to straighten Hermione's head. "Quick, grind these dried nettles into a fine powder." Her cheeks were soft and warm. Loren couldn't resist pinching them once. She flinched and then got to work, realizing this recipe differed from the book and asking, "Isn't the book saying grind the nettles and the pufferfish together to a medium-fine powder?" Loren ground pufferfish eyes in the other mortar. "Nettles to a fine powder, pufferfish to medium fine. The pufferfish absorbs the nettles better that way." "Why not grind everything fine? If the pufferfish are ground too fine, they'll float when you add the dew." "Oh," Hermione brightened, half understanding, unaware of the smudgy charcoal fingerprints on her face from handling the fuel. On the table beside her, Harry's swelling solution was too watery. He felt miserable and guilty. 50 points had been a lot, but insulting a professor deserved punishment. Snape paused several times to mock Harry's thin potion. When Snape turned to pick on Neville instead, Harry actually breathed a little easier and felt guiltier for being relieved. After class, Hermione was drawing a pufferfish on Loren's cheek with charcoal, while the others laughed. Harry slipped out quietly, took the stairs 2 at a time, and pushed open the hospital wing door. Madame Pomfrey gave him a string of warnings before he could look in on Sirius. Sirius lay with his chest wrapped in bandages and a neck brace. He craned his neck to sip from a cup. "Let me help you, Sirius," Harry said, taking the cup and holding it to his mouth. Sirius tried to scratch his head, but the bandages wouldn't let him. He gave a sheepish grin. "I'm not really thirsty, just bored, treating this like a game." Harry glanced at him, then asked, "Did Madame Pomfrey say how you are? Will you be all right?" Sirius grinned again, a little rueful. "Not too bad. They had to dig around for some bone fragments in the muscles, but they've got them out. I should be discharged tomorrow. If I'm out in time, I can even stand in for a defense class before the holiday." Relieved that he was going to be all right, Harry let his annoyance spill. That old bat, Snape, went too far. That was supposed to be a demonstration duel between professors, and he used too much force. He even docked me 50 points today. I'm ashamed to face everyone. Sirius's smile faded. He looked uncomfortable. Actually, strictly speaking, it was my fault. I shouldn't have used that charm to provoke him. What do you mean? Harry asked. Provoke an opponent in a duel to make them lose their cool. That's normal dueling strategy, isn't it? It's complicated, Sirius said. I can't explain it properly now. Once I'd had time to calm down, I knew I'd been wrong. Why? Harry pressed. He remembered the name James, his father, and his heart tightened. What unforgivable thing are you talking about? Sirius hesitated. I can't tell you yet. Not now. Harry started to object. Snape was a greasy git, and he still hated him. But Sirius went on, voice quieter. Back then, James and I did something awful to Snape. I used to think he deserved a lot of what he got, to be honest. He paused, looking at the ceiling. But for that one thing, even if he'd used the killing curse on me, I would have accepted it. I found it strange he didn't answer with something worse. You did something to him? Harry said, stunned. So that's why he's been targeting me? No one's out to get anyone for no reason, Sirius snapped gently. I admit, James and I went too far. Remus felt ashamed of us, but Snape took every chance he could to cast nasty charms at us too. If it hadn't been for the four of us sticking together, we'd have been the ones who suffered. He went on for a while in a rush of words, then sank back against the pillows, breath coming a little fast. After a long pause, he said simply, Like I said, back then, we were all idiots. After Harry left, dusk came quickly. Madame Pomfrey appeared soon after, carrying the specially prepared dinner for the injured. Because Sirius was difficult to move, she had prepared a liquid meal, a long tube fed to his mouth so he could drink without effort. Then the ward settled into a long, dull night. Through the lattice window, the deep blue of the evening flowed in, laying everything, the white beds, the white sheets, the thin privacy curtains, under a quiet, watery tint. The hospital was very still. Madame Pomfrey was busy elsewhere, and there was no sound. Sirius had no interest in company after talking with Harry. The world seemed to have narrowed to the ward alone. He leaned against the headrest and stared, eyes unfocused. For a while, he let the past come unbidden, half like watching an old Muggle film. Black and white stills flickered into motion, filling with the colors of a life that had been peeled raw by time. He was born in 1959 in Islington, into the most ancient and noble Black family. His parents, Orion and Walburga Black, were cousins, fervent dark wizards who worshipped pedigree and kept the family motto, always pure, like law. They turned their noses up at muggles, muggle-borns, squibs, and anyone who betrayed the bloodline. Family members were expected to marry only into an acceptable pure-blood house. Every word and gesture had to be measured. The rules of the Black family sat on him like a harness, suffocating. In rebellion, and to spite his parents, he plastered Gryffindor banners on his bedroom walls, put up pictures of Muggle girls in bikinis on motorcycles, and pinned photos of himself with his school friends. Looking back, it seemed absurd and childish. His schoolboy antics were no wiser, playing truant, hexing classmates, arranging duels with Slytherins until masks and manners fell away into raw violence. He could be cruel in jest to those he disliked. It felt easy. Then Andromeda, his cousin, was disowned for marrying a Muggle. Ted Tunks, branded a blood traitor. At 16, Sirius could no longer breathe at Grimmauld Place. He ran away and moved in with James Potter and was formally disowned. The next year, he inherited money from his uncle Alfred. Later came the First Wizarding War and Azkaban. Memories of the house in Black family smell, damp, dusty, oddly sweet, and putrid, were stubborn. Even after years alone in Azkaban, the house felt like a presence. Regulus had died, probably eliminated for attempting to leave the Death Eaters. From a distance, Sirius had the absurd thought that being disowned by his family was a lesser fate than being cut out by the Death Eaters. His mother's portrait in the house had not always been the raving figure it sometimes seemed. Once she had been merely spiteful, then hysterical when younger family members died. His father, fingers always on a heavy gold signet ring engraved with a black crest, had been another fixture. There were kinder relatives, Uncle Fleamont and Aunt Euphemia, and the Potters were almost like a second home. He felt guilt about James's death, guilty something he could not properly explain to Fleamont and Euphemia, who had been so good to him. And he blamed Peter Pettigrew, Wormtail, for the betrayal that cost so much. A distant street in Hampshire drifted up in his mind, an image and then a voice. Many people will die. It shouldn't be here. The phrase hung in the darkness like a prophecy. He awoke with a start, heart pounding, breath coming fast. He lay very still a moment, feeling a fear he couldn't name. Friday dawned clear. Madame Pomfrey's mending charms had worked, though veins stood red at the corners of his eyes. The bandages were gone, and there was no outward sign of discomfort when Sirius turned up for morning class. He had brought a glass tank with him, some Grindylows from the Black Lake for demonstration. For the students in Defense Against the Dark Arts, it was an attention-catching start. From where Loren sat, he could keep a cool face. Under Dumbledore's watchful eye, no one would try anything reckless. Better to enjoy the rare calm and the company of friends than dwell on what might have been. He'd learn from the lesson and let the rest go. Through the transparent tank, the Grindylows pressed ugly faces to the glass, green, horned, rows of green-ined teeth, and those long, skinny fingers ended in dark, calloused nails, crusted with silt. When a hush fell over the students, they shrank back into a corner and looked almost harmless. Sirius tapped the glass with a finger, and they bared their teeth. "Today we're going to learn how to deal with Grindylows," he said. "Before that, has anyone studied this creature?" Hermione was the first to raise her hand, to no one's surprise. More startling was Ron, who shot his hand up so fast his whole face seemed to shout, "Pick me! Pick me!" Seamus blinked in astonishment. Dean muttered that it must be a dream. After months at school together, Loren had learned to read his godson and his friends. The show of hands made him smile. "Sirius, call on Ron," Loren said quietly, and Sirius did. Ron sat up, cleared his throat, and announced in earnest tones, "Grindylows are not very intelligent, but ferocious dark creatures. Merpeople sometimes train them as pets. They're green, have green teeth, horns on their heads, and, most importantly, very long fingers." He went on, at length and with confidence, about how those fingers could steal bait from hooks and the need for special bait when fishing in Grindylow-infested waters, until Sirius' expression tightened and he cut him off. "Stop," he said. "Tell us how to deal with them." Ron blinked, sheepish. I don't know." Sirius pursed his lips, let out a small breath, and awarded 10 points to Gryffindor. "Now the characteristics." Ron barely heard the rest. He was already basking in the glow of glory. He had earned a point for Gryffindor the respectable way, not by fighting monsters, and he felt vindicated. He shot grins to his friends, nearly radiating smugness. The twins at the Gryffindor table watched and teased. Ron protested, waving fists, but Fred and George overpowered him easily, and the lunch table erupted in good-natured shouting. Loren watched the scene with amusement. Hermione, predictably, was exasperated. She jabbed Loren's arm. "Stop staring. Eat faster. We'll go to the classroom when you've finished." "Why go so early?" he asked. "We want the front middle seats," she said. "There'll be auditors. We should be visible." "There are only a few dozen in the Animagus class," Loren said. "We don't need to rush." "If there are auditors," she said, "it'll be embarrassing if we end up in the back." They were not wrong. The Animagus lesson had drawn interest from every house and year. The ability to transform into an animal at will had powerful appeal. Hermione dragged Loren out after lunch, and they arrived early at the Transfiguration classroom, managing the middle of the front row as planned. Students who were not enrolled in the class sat at the back out of courtesy. Those who were auditing clustered along the sides. The room was full half an hour before McGonagall's scheduled start. 5 minutes before class, Professor McGonagall swept in, looking less severe than usual and with a faint smile, and Sirius followed carrying a small, transparent glass bottle. McGonagall chose the podium. Sirius set the bottle on the lecture table and found a seat to the right. McGonagall surveyed the room and with a quick flourish of her wand, traced the 4 walls. An invisible ripple ran the length of the classroom. Stone shifted and widened, and with a crack the floor stretched and new rows of desks and chairs rose up neatly from the ground. The crowded crush eased as space opened. The classroom no longer felt cramped. Professor McGonagall inclined her head, and with that, the first animagus lesson began. For our first lesson, we won't be doing formal instruction. Instead, I'll be going over some basic information about becoming an animagus and the precautions you must take. Professor McGonagall said from behind the lectern, her measured voice carrying to every corner of the classroom. First, students who haven't been admitted to the animagus class this time need not worry. The animagus class will be a permanent part of the Transfiguration Club, and each year the club will hold selection exams for it. Everyone will have a chance to take the exam. A ripple of excitement and relieved murmurs ran through the room. Making the animagus class permanent meant more chances. If you failed once, you could try again the next year. A few failed attempts could be considered experience. Some students even comforted themselves that if, after repeated tries, they still couldn't get in, perhaps Transfiguration simply wasn't their gift. The examples I gave earlier should show you why caution is necessary, McGonagall continued. Mirabella, who turned into a haddock and was lost in Loch Lomond. Dark Wizard Thaddeus Thurkel's 7 hedgehog sons. These are not amusing stories. They are bloody examples of failed human transfiguration. There were further, less dramatic, but still permanent problems. Large patches of animal fur or scales, webbed fingers, gills appearing on the chin, mouths becoming bird beaks, horns growing from the skull. Minor defects might be hidden, but anything on the face could ruin a life. The students' enthusiasm cooled as they took in the risks. The class remembered why there were only 7, now 8 registered animagi in Britain. This magic was dangerous. "Do we face those risks too?" Fred Weasley shouted. "As long as you follow the rules we set, Professor Black and I will monitor your progress and check your physical condition constantly," McGonagall replied. "There should be no irreversible damage. I can't offer an absolute guarantee, however. Members of the class may withdraw at any time." George raised his hand and called out, "That won't dampen our enthusiasm for turning into lions." The room erupted. Voices shouted back in a mad jumble. "Eagles! Pythons! Badgers! Hufflepuff! Hands off!" "What? Looking down on us? Badgers have wolverines." "Quiet!" McGonagall's tone shut them up. "You must understand most animagi do not become magnificent eagles, lions, or tigers. More often they turn into house cats, dogs, small birds, even insects. Is it worth spending months or years to learn this magic, only to end up as a mundane animal?" she asked. Cedric muttered to his neighbor, "She won't even mention badgers," and the Gryffindors near him chuckled. The students had been given a rough outline of the ritual beforehand. McGonagall reviewed it methodically so there would be no illusions. "First," she said, "for an entire lunar month, from full moon to full moon, you must keep a single mandrake leaf in your mouth at all times. You cannot swallow it, and you must not remove it. If the leaf leaves your mouth, the process must be restarted. Second, at the full moon, remove the leaf and put it in a small crystal phial filled with your saliva. Leave the leaf in the phial to receive pure moonlight. If that night is overcast, you must find a new leaf and begin again. To the moonlit phial, add 1 hair of your own and a silver teaspoon of dew, collected from a place untouched by sun or human contact for 7 full days. Finally, add a death's head hawkmoth chrysalis. Place the mixture somewhere quiet and dark, and do not look at it or disturb it until the next thunderstorm. Third, while you wait for that thunderstorm, this could take weeks, months, even years, you must, at sunrise and sunset, point your wand at your heart and repeat the incantation, Amato animo animato animagus. At some point you will feel, when your wand tip touches your chest, a second heartbeat, sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker than your own. Fourth, when lightning splits the sky, immediately take the phial to a spacious, safe place. Point your wand at your heart, say the incantation again, and drink the blood-red potion that has formed. The remainder is mastering the beast within you. If all goes well, your animagus transformation is complete. She paused and fixed them with a stern look. Do not attempt this on your own. Do not copy other students. Without supervision, anything unfortunate can happen. Sunlight contamination, for example, leads to the most severe mutations. McGonagall's eyes swept the room and landed on Sirius Black. He said nothing, merely straightened in his seat. Many students sat in silence, their imagined glamour of majestic animal forms dissolving into the sober facts of risk, randomness, and tedium. Yet even so, many remained excited. Some had already decided it was worth the gamble. McGonagall smiled slightly, then used her last, most persuasive deterrent. In addition to myself, Professor Black is an animagus. I believe some of you have seen him. Sirius stood, bowed to the class, then sat again to polite applause. McGonagall continued, "Before our official lessons begin, we've invited an animagus from abroad who asked to remain anonymous. She will demonstrate a transformation into a rather unusual category, a beetle." The room went silent, then erupted in incredulous whispers. A beetle? Someone really is an animagus beetle? After months of work and training, to turn into a beetle? No thanks. Loren and Hermione exchanged looks. Hermione, incredulous, leaned over and whispered, "Professor McGonagall actually made her an assistant?" Loren shrugged. "Maybe not an assistant, maybe a teaching aide." A hush fell as a glass bottle was brought into the room and placed on the table beside the podium. Inside was a glossy black beetle. Rita Skeeter, Ravenclaw alumna and notorious reporter, felt 1,000 eyes on her. The Transfiguration classroom had changed since she was a student. Now it even taught animagus transformation. Not long before, Rita had been contacted by Senior Undersecretary Umbridge from the Ministry of Magic with a large offer to cooperate on propaganda. Rita, a best-selling author and award-winning journalist, had hesitated. She wasn't used to being anyone's mouthpiece. But the sums rose, and Umbridge granted access to ministry archives and other assistance. Given Veritaserum, Rita had gone to Godric's Hollow to meet Bathilda Bagshot, author of A History of Magic, and the only person still in town who had known Dumbledore's mother. Bathilda, under the influence of Veritaserum, had revealed intimate details of Albus Dumbledore's youth, and about Gellert Grindelwald, Bathilda's great-nephew, who had been introduced to young Albus. Armed with those confessions, Rita planned a book on Dumbledore, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. The sensational articles she published based on Bathilda's disclosures had sent the Daily Prophet's sales skyrocketing. Rita then tried to enter Hogwarts as a reporter, but McGonagall refused her. Undeterred, Rita snuck into the castle to eavesdrop for more material, and was promptly caught and handed to McGonagall, who in turn took her to Dumbledore. Rita had expected the Ministry to intervene on her behalf, thinking she could bribe or bargain her way out of punishment. Then one night, Snape came to the headmaster's office. After a brief conversation, Dumbledore stunned her with a stupefy. When she regained consciousness, she found herself in a grimy, disused classroom with Snape and McGonagall interrogating her. Dumbledore and McGonagall, masters of transfiguration, had dispelled her animagus form with ease. Snape forced a concoction into her mouth that blurred her memories and left her at their mercy. Snape's words made the danger clear. "You've fabricated facts, Miss Skeeter, slander involving high-ranking ministry officials and even the American Magical Congress. Quidditch scandals, player transfers, abuse, bribes. You chase only sensational stories." He let the consequences hang in the air. If she published everything, powerful people might seek to ruin her, possibly even put a price on her head. Faced with that, Rita begged for a way out. She struck a deal and accepted the position McGonagall offered, a teaching aide in the animagus demonstration, under whatever terms the headmistress would exact. Back in the present, McGonagall unscrewed the bottle and tipped the beetle onto the table. "Begin your performance," she said. Under 100 pairs of eyes, the beetle unfurled its tiny wings and took to the air beside the podium. It began to swell, its carapace peeled back, antennae lengthened, and a human outline emerged. The transformation revealed a woman with disordered blonde hair, chipped red nail polish, and glasses missing the fake jeweled fittings they once had. The costume of former glamour was gone. A black mask covered the lower half of her face. Though it protected her anonymity, it preserved the only dignity she had left. Seeing so many faces in the room, Rita's eyes darted nervously, but she knew Snape and McGonagall held her worst secrets, and that kept her silent. The students watched, breathless, then began to whisper. "Why is she covering her face?" someone asked. A student whose parent worked at the ministry answered in a hushed tone, "Because she's an unregistered animagus. There's no registered beetle animagus in Britain." Eyes widened. A Hufflepuff pupil leaned toward the nearest prefect. "Should we report an unregistered animagus?" Fred glared. "You trying to get us all in trouble? Report Professor McGonagall while you're at it?" I'm not. McGonagall tapped the lectern to restore order. Don't overthink it. This assistant was invited from another country. She is not registered with the British Ministry of Magic. Hermione's voice was low. What do you think Professor McGonagall will do with her in the end? Loren looked back at the glass bottle and the masked woman on the table. I don't know, he said. At least you don't have to worry about McGonagall handing her over to the Ministry. 245. Hermione's Journey to the Ministry of Magic. The essence of becoming an animagus isn't simply understanding Transfiguration's theory. It's about knowing yourself and persevering. If you're unsure after what I've said, I suggest you withdraw. The whole lesson was more warning than instruction, laced with Professor McGonagall's own experiences and caveats. Loren and Hermione filtered out the discouragement and took a great deal away. After class, McGonagall left with Rita, this time without putting her back into a glass jar. That evening in the Gryffindor common room, Loren and Hermione were curled up on a corner sofa, racing to finish the mountain of homework that had piled up over the Easter holiday. Harry and Ron had gathered a group of younger students to play Exploding Snap. The clash of wizard chess pieces and the crackle of snap filled the room. Luna, her messy golden hair falling to her waist, drifted between groups carrying a stack of newspapers and offering them to everyone she knew. The Quibbler, latest issue, have a look. Her voice was airy and almost song-like. She handed a paper between Loren and Hermione. Take one. My dad finally managed a proper advertisement, Honeyduke's Easter promotion. Very interesting. Loren took one casually and watched Luna skip away. Hermione frowned and asked, She's giving these away just to tell us Mr. Toller Lovegood got an ad. Looking at Luna's large stack, Loren clicked his tongue. I suspect Mr. Lovegood might lose money on this one. Since it was Luna's good intention, Loren unfolded the paper and began to read aloud. Honeydukes proudly presents Easter egg-shaped chocolates with thrilling surprise gifts inside. Hermione's nose wrinkled at the florid language. The advertising copy was so overdone, it suggested a Muggle-born had written it. A product display showed egg-shaped chocolates containing various surprises, like trick wands. Twist one open, a puff of smoke, and a gift would be revealed. Loren's eyes lit up when he reached the grand prize. Look, he spread the paper so Hermione could see. The grand prize is a bison. Twist open the egg, the smoke clears, and a bison will be standing on your chest. He grinned. Apparently, it's inspired by a misuse of the levitation charm. Imagine someone opening that on a Hogsmeade street, rampaging bison everywhere. I wonder if Uncle Ambrose hasn't done some harmless modifications. Hermione's quill slipped on her parchment. Fortunately, it was a newer model. She flipped it, and the nib sucked the ink back into the barrel. She looked up at him, speechless. Why the disappointed look? You want a bison to run wild in the street? Heh? Loren leaned closer and lowered his voice. Hermione, let's go to Hogsmeade tomorrow. Easter must be huge fun. We can't leave school during the Easter holiday. It's not an activity week. Even the older students aren't allowed out. Loren nodded. Then we'll use the secret passage behind the 5th floor mirror. Who said it's settled? Where did you hear I agreed? She protested. After a bit of argument, Loren declared they'd get up early for breakfast, spend the morning in Hogsmeade, and return for lunch. Hermione privately resolved to be the first out of bed and stop him. The next morning, Hermione woke to find her roommates still asleep. She washed, changed into clothes suitable for traveling, and was about to go dissuade Loren when a silver phoenix Patronus slipped through the window and settled on her shoulder. In a delicate, familiar voice, Dumbledore spoke from the beak. Hermione, come to the headmaster's office after breakfast. We're going to look into Loren and Sirius's matter. The password is egg-shaped chocolate. The Patronus dissolved into a scatter of tiny silver lights. Hermione frowned and pressed her lips together. She was almost the first to reach the Great Hall. After she reluctantly ate, Loren burst in from outside and sat next to her. Ha! So early! Couldn't you wait? He teased. Hermione felt the weight lift a little seeing him. She arranged his favorite things, bacon, fried eggs, orange juice, on a plate and handed it over. Something came up. I can't go to Hogsmeade with you today, she said apologetically. What came up? Can't you postpone it? Loren asked. Hermione avoided his gaze and said nothing. Sigh. Loren sighed heavily, his knife making a creak on the plate. So mysterious, always like this lately. Fine. What am I supposed to do if you won't go? Petrify you with a binding spell and levitate you to the secret passage, then follow it to Honeyduke's basement? A smile tugged at Hermione's mouth despite herself, and she patted his shoulder. Be more specific. Nasty. Untrustworthy. You break promises at the last minute and hit me. Too much. Loren mock glared. Bang, she retorted, and they left it at that. When Hermione reached the headmaster's office, Dumbledore stood by the bed, sipping tea. He'd traded his usual robes for a mid-length black velvet coat and was wearing a brown derby hat upside down on the desk. The style was a few decades out of date, but his straight posture and dignified bearing turned it into something oddly elegant. Hermione found herself looking twice. Hearing her enter, Dumbledore finished his tea in one gulp and remarked wryly, "Too old, low on energy. Strong tea perks me up." She pretended not to hear and asked, "Professor, how are we going to investigate? Do you have any leads?" Dumbledore smiled. "Not just leads. I can hazard a guess about what happened between them. I need evidence to confirm it." Hermione blinked. "But, Professor, if you only need confirmation, wouldn't it be easier for you to do it alone? Why have me come?" "Why would you think that?" Dumbledore answered, voice slow and firm. "Hermione, you are more important than you realize." She was puzzled, but there was no time to press him. Dumbledore popped the hat on his head, came to her side, placed one hand on her shoulder, extended the other to the perch, and Fawkes flew down to alight on his arm. With a clear cry, Hermione felt a sensation like apparition, but different. She expected to be transported to some magical repository, an ancient treehouse with prophecy crystals, or a tower with a mirror. Instead, they materialized in a shabby, deserted street alley. Dumbledore led her out into the street, which was empty. Then, somewhat to her astonishment, he steered her into a grubby, unremarkable underground station and onto a crowded subway train. They had to stand. Hermione had on a plain Muggle shirt. Dumbledore had tucked his beard into his coat and kept on his hat. Anyone seeing them would think a grandfather and his granddaughter. It was utterly Muggle, and Hermione tugged his sleeve. "Professor, where are we going?" she whispered. Dumbledore glanced at her tense face, chuckled, and gave a small wiggle of a finger, murmuring, "Muffliato." Then, in an ordinary voice, he said, "We are going to the Ministry of Magic." Hermione noticed the other passengers showed no sign of hearing them. The spell must have been muffling their conversation. "Why take the subway to the Ministry? Wizards usually apparate." "Yes, apparition would be quicker," Dumbledore said, "but I have not ridden the Underground in a very long time." The idea that Dumbledore had ever ridden the subway surprised Hermione enough that she nearly let go of the handrail. As the train jolted into a stop, she almost lost her balance. Dumbledore steadied her with an amused pride. "Don't be so surprised. I have a rather large scar on my knee that's a complete map of the London Underground." Hermione stared. Dumbledore listed things he'd noticed at the station: automatic ticket machines, escalators, televisions, the movement of commuters, and shook his head. "Muggle inventions are, to many wizards, more astounding than magic." He glanced over. "I once discussed these matters with Loren. He said Muggle culture will eventually pervade the magical world. What do you think, Hermione?" "I haven't given it that sort of thought," she admitted. "You should consider taking Muggle studies," he went on. "Although you are Muggle-born, it might be enlightening. It could inspire you." When course choices came up, Hermione brightened. "Professor, I want to take every class, but Loren says there will be timetable clashes. Is there any way around that?" "To be honest, I don't recommend taking every course," Dumbledore said with a teasing wink. "But there's no rule against it, is there?" "Really, Professor?" Hermione's eyes shone at the hint. They counted down stops. 4 more stops, Hermione, now 3. They left the train in central London and were swept up with the tide of well-dressed commuters. Up the escalator, through the ticket barriers, Dumbledore was oddly delighted by the turnstile swallowing his ticket, and out into the bustling street with its grand buildings. After several turns, the buildings dwindled, the street narrowed, and finally they squeezed into a battered red telephone kiosk on a side road. Under Hermione's astonished gaze, Dumbledore dialed 62442 on the old rotary and waited. A crisp, impersonal female voice filled the booth, as if it were speaking from nowhere. "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic. Please state your name and business." "Wulfric Bryan. I have an appointment with Mr. Arthur Weasley of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office." Hermione's eyes widened. Dumbledore had lied without batting an eyelid. Dumbledore carried on lightly. "Regarding the flying car from last year, this is Hermione Granger. We have a lead." Before he could continue, the voice cut in. "Thank you. Guests, please take your badges and pin them to the front of your clothes." Clink, clatter. The coin return spat out 2 square silver badges. They read, "Wulfric Bryan, providing lead. Hermione Granger, providing lead." Hermione, copying Dumbledore, stuck the badge to her chest in a daze. The voice informed them, "Guests of the Ministry of Magic must pass through security and register their wands. The security desk is at the end of the hall." The telephone booth began to sink with a grinding, mechanical motion. A thin ribbon of golden light curled around their feet and widened until it shone up into their faces. Just as the light threatened to pierce her eyes, Dumbledore flicked his sleeve, and the sensation vanished. "The Ministry of Magic wishes you a pleasant day," the voice intoned, and the door of the booth burst open onto a magnificent hall. The floor gleamed dark wood. The ceiling was peacock blue, inlaid with shifting golden symbols like a vast living notice board. The walls were dark polished paneling, with gilded fireplaces set within. Occasionally a witch or wizard would step out of one fireplace, while others queued to depart from another. In the center of the hall, a fountain circled a cluster of gold statues: wizards, witches, centaurs, goblins, house elves. Hermione's attention snagged on a fearsome figure striding toward them. He looked as if a careless carpenter had carved his face from rotten wood. Every inch seemed scarred. His mouth was a crooked gash, his nose was almost missing, and his eyes didn't match. One small, black, ordinary eye, the other a bright blue orb that rotated independently. The blue eye rolled back and briefly vanished into his skull, leaving a blank white. "Allow me to introduce an old friend," Dumbledore said pleasantly. "This is Alastor Moody, and this, Hermione Granger, is my new friend." "Most people call me Mad-Eye," Moody growled, his blue eye sweeping over Hermione before retracting. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "You don't even know what those fools did. That stinking rat got away. If I hadn't gone back to Azkaban to check, no one at the Ministry would have known. That fool Fudge had enough sense to call me back to investigate this," he continued, cursing a string of names. Dumbledore nodded and smiled. "I appreciate your trouble, Alastor." "Because you're Albus Dumbledore, I wouldn't do this for anyone else." Mad-Eye Moody grumbled. "This way." Moody strode ahead, jabbering about dark wizards who'd tried to break into his garden and about every other person he distrusted. Dumbledore occasionally asked for the reason behind his suspicions. Hermione walked quietly behind them, taking in the sights of the Ministry. As they passed the great fountain, she peered into the water and saw glittering sickles and bronze nuts lying on the bottom. A stained plaque read that all proceeds from the Fountain of Magical Brethren were donated to St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. Hermione's eyes flicked to the golden statues on the fountain. 2 wizards standing above other figures, centaurs, goblins, house elves, all looking up in adoration. The poses felt awkward to her. Centaurs did not behave so. "This is a problem left over from the First Wizard Council," Dumbledore explained, as if noticing her puzzlement. The speaker at the time, Elfrida Clegg, pushed to define as people any creature that could speak human language and everything else as beasts. That excluded merpeople. "That caused many complications," he went on. "Trolls and even flobberworms that could imitate human speech were classified as people, and inviting them to the council created chaos. Centaurs and merpeople have a good relationship, mutual respect. The centaurs considered this an insult and withdrew from the council. It wasn't until 1811, when Minister Grogan Stump redefined people, that merpeople were technically eligible. They refused the status, though. They didn't want to be grouped with some of the darker creatures, such as hags and vampires. For a long time, many creatures refused to attend council meetings, and this statue was left as it is," Dumbledore added, looking at the fountain with regret. "I often feel it's quite impolite, but I haven't been able to persuade the people at the Ministry to change it. Perhaps you, someday, will find a way." Moody, who had been scanning the hall constantly with his swiveling magical eye, turned and stared at them for a moment with an odd expression. Hermione felt that Dumbledore's words had sounded strange, but couldn't say why. The central hall was busy with ministry employees, some staggering under precarious piles of parchment, others clutching battered briefcases, many reading the Daily Prophet as they walked. Their faces had that flat look of people working on a holiday morning. Everyone steered clear of Moody, avoiding the path of his ever-rotating blue eye as if afraid of being picked out. Because of Moody's intimidating presence, Dumbledore and Hermione were waved through the wand registration line. They passed through a row of golden doors into a smaller hall where 24 lifts went up and down along the walls, their golden grille doors clanging and clattering. Ahead, Arthur Weasley caught sight of them and waved. He looked delighted and a little embarrassed to see Dumbledore in some sort of disguise. "Good morning, Hermione, Alastor, and," he started, then lowered his voice. "Headmaster Dumbledore, excellent disguise. If it weren't for Alastor, I wouldn't have recognized you." "Good morning, Arthur," Dumbledore replied with a smile. Moody gave a curt nod, eyes still sweeping the room. "Good morning, Mr. Weasley," Hermione said politely. A lift descended with a clang. Arthur motioned them in. The people already inside hurried out when they saw Moody, as if fleeing to the next lift. Arthur laughed happily. "Thanks to Alastor, it couldn't be easier." Dumbledore chuckled too. Hermione glanced at Moody. He pursed his lips. The grill door slammed shut, and the lift began to move, chains rattling. The indifferent female voice that announced floors in the ministry sounded again. Level 9, Department of Mysteries. Hermione had barely wondered what the Department of Mysteries might be when the lift doors opened onto an empty corridor, unlike those upstairs. There were no windows, no offices, just a single, utterly black door at the far end. Arthur and Moody went ahead. Dumbledore and Hermione followed behind. The corridor felt chill and secretive. "Crouch is on vacation and Bode's handling things upstairs, so we shouldn't be disturbed," Arthur said, sounding relaxed. Moody took up the conversation in his gruff voice. "Honestly, Albus, you're worrying too much. Nothing can go wrong in the Hall of Prophecy. Even if he had come back to life, he wouldn't dare set foot inside the ministry." "Hall of Prophecy? Come back to life?" Hermione's mind filled with questions. Was he talking about Lord Voldemort? Weren't they here about Loren's case? The unfamiliar surroundings and the presence of strangers made her keep quiet. "You know, I don't trust people at the ministry much these days," Dumbledore said lightly. "Overthinking. That's an odd thing to hear from you, Alastor." Dumbledore teased in turn. "My suspicions are well-founded," Moody snapped. Limping along, he swung open the black door. "Do you take this little girl in too?" he said, eyeing Hermione with mock menace. She'll be trembling to see what's inside." "Don't listen to him," Dumbledore said gently. "We'll be going through the time room to reach the Hall of Prophecy. There's nothing to be afraid of." He glanced at Hermione. "She'll be using a time turner next year. Understanding the power of time beforehand will be useful." Moody's tone shifted immediately from derisive to approving. "She's going to take all her classes then. No wonder you brought her." Hermione felt even more bewildered, but Moody pushed the door open and led them into a circular chamber painted entirely black. The floor, ceiling, and walls absorbed the light. Set into the walls were 12 identical unmarked black doors, evenly spaced. Candles with blue flames guttered here and there, their cold light reflected on the polished marble, so the floor looked like a dark, bottomless pool. The whole room made Hermione uneasy. Dumbledore took her hand, and the warm grip steadied her. Arthur shut the door behind them. With a grinding rumble, the circular walls began to revolve. Hermione gripped Dumbledore's hand harder, fearful the floor might move too. The blue flames streaked into blurred neon rings as the walls spun. Then, after a moment, everything stopped. Moody's gruff voice cut through the quiet. "Ha! Boring tricks. It's been the same for years." They walked along the wall with Moody limping in the lead. "Brain room death chamber, the locked one," he muttered, stopping in front of a door. "Ha! The time room." Moody opened it, and a brilliant diamond light flooded their faces. Dozens of clocks filled the chamber, grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, travel timepieces, hanging from ledges and standing on long tables. A steady, relentless ticking filled the room like thousands of tiny, marching footsteps. The diamond light came from a tall, bell-shaped crystal dome at the far end of the room. It stood on a table, and inside a whirl of air, a tiny, jewel-bright object floated up and down. When it rose, the shell cracked open like an egg, and a hummingbird burst out, flying to the top of the dome. When the air current dropped, its feathers were muddied and sodden until it sank back into the shell and was re-encased. The little cycle repeated endlessly. Moody and Arthur watched with the casual familiarity of men who had seen it many times. Hermione was captivated. The sight held her, so she lagged behind. "The power of time is always striking," Dumbledore said softly. He stopped and smiled at her. "Arthur, take Hermione around here. Alastor and I will go to the Hall of Prophecy. If we're long, you can take Hermione downstairs to watch a ministry trial. Any interesting cases today?" "There's one," Arthur answered. Willie Witterson's turned a perfectly ordinary lavatory into a biting monster. "A poor muggle's backside was bitten into 7 pieces," Moody growled. "That fellow's a repeat anti-muggle offender. He'll be going to Azkaban this time." Dumbledore patted Hermione's shoulder. "It's an interesting and useful case. You'll regret it if you miss it." Hermione nodded vaguely. Arthur led her toward the bell jar and the cabinet of time-turners. A glass-fronted cupboard held several hourglasses, their sand tumbling and glittering. The light from them distorted the glass and made the cabinet seem to shimmer with a little hint of time magic. "These are the time-turners?" Hermione asked, eyes bright. "Yes," Arthur said, smiling. "I won't explain them. Professor McGonagall will go into detail next term." They lingered a moment, unable to touch the devices. Then Arthur steered Hermione away. They chose not to use the lift. Leaving the Department of Mysteries, they slipped through a gap into a staircase and descended into a lower corridor that was all rough stone and torch brackets, just like the dungeons at Hogwarts. Heavy wooden doors with iron bolts and keyholes lined the passage. "Courtroom 3, 4. Arthur checked the signs on the doors. "I don't know why Dumbledore specifically wanted you to observe this trial, but he must have his reasons." "Specifically asked?" Hermione exclaimed. "I thought we just happened to catch it." "Oh, it's possible," Arthur said, frowning as if mulling over odds. "But knowing Dumbledore, not very likely. What do Muggles call it? Probability theory?" "No, perhaps statistics." He trailed off, eager for someone to discuss such things with. Hermione's head buzzed with new information. Today, she had thought, was about Loren's affair, but it was turning into something much bigger. A visit to the Hall of Prophecy, and apparently, a trial. Questions crowded her mind like bubbles in a boiling kettle. At last, they arrived at an especially gloomy black door bolted with iron. Arthur lowered his voice. "Don't make a noise once we're inside. You should know many important cases aren't public. Luckily, this one is." Hermione nodded and followed him into courtroom 7. They turned right as they entered. A few people were already seated at the back of the room, apparently there to observe. Mr. Weasley led Hermione to the spectator benches, and only then did she get a clear view of the whole courtroom. The chamber was a deep, dark circle, like a hemisphere cut off at the top and divided into 3 tiers. The outer ring rose in rows of seats. The center was sunken, the lowest point in the room, where a single chair sat with iron shackles fixed to its armrests. From every angle, the room focused on that spot, the defendant's seat. At the front stood a square, jet-black wooden table. Behind it presided Senior Undersecretary Dolores Jane Umbridge, in a black judge's robe and a small square hat. She somehow looked neater than she ever had in pink. On either side of her sat other ministry officials in similar robes. Hermione guessed they were scribes. Their tables were not as elaborate as Umbridge's. Around them were about 30 people in magenta robes, each with an exquisite silver W embroidered on the left chest. "Those people are members of the Wizengamot," Arthur whispered. "By procedure, 50 members should take part in a trial. Dumbledore is one of them. But you don't need that many to try Willie Witterson's." The courtroom was hushed, everyone speaking only in whispers, until a man with bandaged hands shuffled to the chair in the center and sat down. The whispering stopped at once. An ominous silence fell. "The defendant is present. Let us begin." Umbridge's voice, still annoyingly shrill, cut through the quiet. She turned to the scribe at her side. "Are you ready?" "Yes, madam." The reply was a cold male voice. The light was poor. Half the scribe's face was in shadow, and Hermione could only make out horn-rimmed glasses. The trial of the 27th of March, Umbridge announced, concerning Willie Wittershin's violation of the International Statute of Secrecy. Interrogator, Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister for Magic, Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The stream of official titles washed past Hermione's ears. She only noticed, with a flash of odd embarrassment, that Umbridge's middle name was the same as hers, Jane. Hermione Jane Granger, she thought guiltily. She might have a word with her parents about her middle name when she went home. Umbridge pulled a parchment from the pile before her and read the charges aloud. The defendant is accused of the following. The defendant has previously received a written warning from the Ministry for similar offenses. On the 20th of March at noon, with full knowledge that his actions were illegal, the defendant deliberately tampered with a normal lavatory in a Muggle supermarket. This act constitutes a breach of the International Confederation of Wizards Statute of Secrecy. Arthur leaned in to whisper to Hermione. He's a repeat offender. An anti-Muggle prankster, used to hide in lavatories and use levitation charms to fling filth about. Why wasn't he tried before? Hermione murmured, keeping her eyes on Willie Wittershin's. Arthur shrugged. He didn't make so big a mess before, didn't cause serious consequences, so no one pressed it. Umbridge read on. Evidence established, by the powers vested in the Wisengamot and under the International Confederation of Wizards statutes, Willie Wittershins is sentenced to 6 months restriction from leaving wizarding residential areas, 3 months ban from working in alchemy-related trades, 5 years restriction from contact with Muggles, and a fine of 300 galleons. Those in favor of the charges being upheld, please raise your hands. She paused, then called, Those against. Now, I declare that the charges against Willie Wittershins are upheld. The whole thing was over much quicker than Hermione had expected. The officials at the front gathered their papers, shut briefcases, and left in a hurry. 2 ministry employees took Willie Wittershins away. In a flash, the courtroom felt empty. It's over, Hermione asked Arthur, bewildered. Arthur's face was full of annoyance. The sentence is far too light. He won't even see a day in Azkaban. Wasn't it usually harsher? Not like this. After that incident, they usually throw every resource at it. Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, Obliviator Headquarters, the Muggle-Worthy Excuse Committee. In the past, he'd have been locked up in Azkaban for at least a year. Then why the change this time? Hermione asked. Arthur slammed his fist on the armrest. Because Umbridge was presiding. She ignored the most important Muggle Protection Act completely, didn't even mention it in court. The Wisengamot members they brought today were pre-arranged, mostly people who don't grasp sentencing specifics. They only vote on whether charges are upheld. With Umbridge steering them, he shook his head. Fudge trusts her too much. As Mr. Weasley spoke, something shifted in Hermione's mind. The once inscrutable ministry revealed itself without veil. The Department of Mysteries still held its secrets, but the courts, the political appointments, human rights, everything felt more crude and provisional than she had imagined. A small seed of disquiet planted itself in her heart. She changed the subject because she didn't know how to comfort Arthur. Shouldn't we go see Headmaster Dumbledore? Oh, yes. Arthur took a breath, composed himself, and led Hermione out of courtroom 7 and up the stairs. On the 9th basement level, outside the Department of Mysteries, Dumbledore waited. Mad-Eye Moody was gone. Apparently, he had already left. Dumbledore looked up from the elevator gate, tucked the derby he'd been twirling back onto his head, and asked, "How was the trial?" "Don't get me started." Arthur's voice was bitter. Umbridge never brought up the Muggle Protection Act. No one in the room knew a Muggle's backside had been mauled, and Wittershins won't spend a single day in Azkaban. Dumbledore nodded and then turned to Hermione. "After listening to a wizard trial, what have you learned, Hermione?" Legal loopholes, discretionary power, thoughts crowded her head. She wanted to speak but couldn't find a clear place to begin. She nodded once, then shook her head. Dumbledore smiled faintly but said nothing. The elevator shaft clattered and the 3 of them stepped in. Without Moody's intimidating presence, the carriage felt ordinary. On the 8th basement level, people were getting on and off as usual. A woman's indifferent voice announced the floors as they rose. 7th floor, Department of Magical Games and Sports, headquarters of the British and Irish Quidditch League, the official Gobstones Club, and the Patents Office for silly patents. 6th floor, Ministry of Transportation, Flu Network Authority, Broom Regulatory Control, Portkey Office, and the Apparition Test Center. Apparition? Hermione glanced at the doors as they opened. Several paper aeroplanes swept into the elevator at that moment, circling over their heads, light purple memos stamped with the ministry seal. Arthur explained with the kind of eager patience he always had for Muggle contraptions. Those are interdepartment memos. They used to use owls, but the mess was dreadful, droppings everywhere on desks. He remembered something mid-sentence and turned eagerly to Hermione. I heard you Muggles have a machine that sends letters over electricity. What is it called? A fax? How does it work? Hermione leaned toward Dumbledore. It isn't electricity exactly, more like signals, similar in principle to a telephone. I don't know the technical details. I'd love to see one, Arthur said, his irritation forgotten, eyes bright. Even more amazing than magic. The elevator continued upward and the announcements resumed. 5th floor, Department of International Magical Cooperation, International Magical Trading Standards, the International Magical Law Office, and the British branch of the International Confederation of Wizards. 4th floor, Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, the Beast, Being and Spirit Divisions, Goblin Liaison Office, and the Pest Advisory Board. 3rd floor, Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, Accidental Magic Reversal Squad, Obliviator Headquarters, and the Muggle-Worthy Excuse Committee. That's the floor for the files we want, Dumbledore said, taking Hermione's hand and leading her out. Arthur lagged a little, still dreamy about faxes, then hurried to catch up. He glanced back. The paper aeroplanes were still looping near the lights. These memos came from the Ministry of Transportation, he said. Only the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and the Minister's Office are left on them, so they must be files on a transportation change sent to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. His face soured again. They're about Willie Wittershins. The Ministry of Transportation has sent instructions to adjust the flu network at his home. Umbridge wants this closed quickly. Dumbledore and Hermione looked at him. A quick conclusion, a lenient sentence, the rushed paperwork. When you put them together, it looks suspicious, Arthur muttered, then stopped himself. Never mind. He shook his head to clear it. Dumbledore said you wanted to see the files about Peter Pettigrew from back then. Come with me. They walked down a corridor lined with doors. Unlike the dim lower levels, this floor had windows that let in bright sunlight. People moved to and fro. Arthur grew somber as he spoke. After the fall of you-know-who, his followers searched everywhere for Pettigrew. They wanted revenge because they knew their master had chosen Peter's plan to attack the Potters. His voice dropped. Sirius Black was hunting him too. When they cornered Pettigrew on a crowded street, he used his wand to cause an explosion and cut off one of his own right fingers to get away. That explosion caused a terrible scene. An entire street of Muggles witnessed it. 12 Muggles died instantly. Barty Crouch and Cornelius Fudge, before he was minister, led the response. Hermione felt something inside her go numb and cold. The sunlight through the windows seemed suddenly brittle. Arthur continued, quieter now. Almost everyone from the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes was sent out, the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad, Obliviators. They came to a heavy oak double door marked Archives. Arthur pushed it open and spoke, his voice low and steady. Especially the Muggle-Worthy Excuse Committee. To cover that disaster, they negotiated with the Muggle government for weeks, finally issuing a statement about a series of traffic accidents and a gas leak. The archive room was vast, like a library, the air rich with the smell of aged paper. Thanks to magic, there was no mold or insect damage, but the presence of all that history made Hermione's breathing slow and shallow. It was as if a flood of cold water poured into her, then froze into blocks that weighed her down. She felt rooted to the spot, reluctant to cross the threshold. Dumbledore placed a hand on her shoulder and took her hand in his. The old man's warm palm helped a little. He turned to Arthur. "We won't go in, Arthur. Would you mind bringing out the files from that time? We should find somewhere we won't be disturbed to look at them." Arthur scratched his head. Of course, they've been sitting there for years. Barely anyone looked at them when Pettigrew was arrested. "Wait here. I'll take you to my office. No one will disturb you there." He disappeared into the stacks and returned a few minutes later with a bundle of papers. They left the archives and climbed to a cramped, dim office that smelled faintly of oil and dust. File cabinets overflowed. Old car adverts and hand-drawn engine diagrams tacked to the walls blurred at the edges for Hermione, as if she were looking at them through a pane of icy glass. Sounds and images seemed muffled, distant. Dumbledore put a single sheet of paper from the archive on the desk in front of her. For a moment, the room filled with a sound in Hermione's mind, like a distant train roar. The words on the paper struck her as if a blade had cleaved the ice that had been holding her in place. Victim list: Amelia Morgan, Orlando Morgan, 248. I don't forgive anyone. Headmaster Dumbledore, they were Loren's parents, weren't they? Hermione asked hoarsely. I think so, Dumbledore said softly, his voice full of sorrow. Hermione's heart ached. She had no other thought but to get back to Loren and hold him as tightly as she could. Arthur Weasley scratched his head, looking between them, clearly at a loss. Headmaster Dumbledore? Dumbledore only shook his head, offering no explanation. Outside the ministry exit, Arthur watched them leave, worry plain on his face. He wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. From the Morgan's name, he had already guessed some of it. Pettigrew had been found hiding in their home, and Loren had caught him the moment he came into Hogwarts. He and Ron had been close friends with Loren and Harry ever since. To learn, all at once, that Loren's parents had died because of Sirius and Pettigrew, one a benefactor, the other a member of the Order, left Arthur muttering and sighing the whole walk home. Dumbledore, supporting a still-shaken Hermione, said quietly, That flying car's horn was unbearable. They always left it in the Forbidden Forest. A lot of animals were glad it was gone. Arthur frowned. George and Fred said it was destroyed by the Humping Willow. He broke off, suddenly earnest. Don't worry, Professor. I'll look into it as soon as I can. Two mischievous boys, Dumbledore mused. I don't know how they convinced Percy to help them hide it. Arthur rambled on until Dumbledore nodded, and with a soft crack, vanished with Hermione. Arthur stood staring at the empty spot for a long moment before sighing. Merlin. Back in the headmaster's office, the familiar chirp of Fawkes settled Hermione enough for her to focus. The room felt steadier around her. Headmaster, she said, voice thin, I want to go to Loren. I want to speak with you first, Hermione. Dumbledore folded his fingers and, after a pause, gave a small, guiding smile. He took off his hat and coat, poured her a steaming cup of black tea, and set it on the desk between them, as if to tell her to calm herself. You and Loren are very close, he said quietly. I know how much you care for him. For that reason, there are arrangements we must consider. Hermione's head was still spinning from the news. She blinked at him. What do you mean? Have you noticed the persistent bloodshot in Sirius's eyes? Dumbledore asked. Madame Pomfrey reports he hasn't slept well since he arrived at Hogwarts. I did not remove the strange bit of magic Loren put on him. I thought removing it might alarm you and him both, but I can sense it. It isn't fatal. Relief rushed through Hermione at the last words, and then the relief twisted into something tighter and more painful. The man who had set so much in motion was sitting right there, and yet Dumbledore had chosen to leave the magic in place. The thought made her chest ache. Dumbledore watched her with a complicated expression. I would like to ask you to help mediate between Loren and Sirius, to soothe Loren, to see whether he might accept some kind of compensation. Hermione's jaw set. No. Despite the respect she felt for the staff and the headmaster, she refused without hesitation. Loren's parents were murdered. None of us have the right to make decisions for him, even if we think it's in his best interest. Dumbledore opened his mouth to argue, but Hermione cut across him, quiet and firm. Those were his parents, Professor. They were murdered. Silence stretched through the office. The portraits had been turned away. Fawkes dozed in the sorting hat. The silver instruments were put aside to create space. Dumbledore got up, went into the alcove, and returned with a shallow stone basin carved with runes. Inside, something moved that was neither liquid nor air, a bright silver substance that swirled like water and smoke combined. Dumbledore placed it on the cleared table. "This is the Pensieve," he said. "Harry may have shown you it once when we revisited the Chamber of Secrets. Normally, Hermione would have asked about runes or the mechanics of the memory craft, but she only looked at Dumbledore, distraught. A tap came at the door. "Headmaster Dumbledore? It's me." "Come in," Dumbledore called. Sirius Black let himself in, breathless and disheveled. His eyes were rimmed red, but he tried to force a smile. Hermione watched him with a steadiness that made him uneasy. "Hey, Miss Granger, why are you staring at me like that?" Dumbledore spoke for her. "Sirius, we need your memory of Pettigrew blowing up that street, of the explosion that killed 12 muggles." Sirius's brows knit. "Wormtail? That was 12 years ago." He placed the tip of his wand to his temple and drew out the memory. The silverish thread he produced was flecked with a crimson stain. He frowned. "Why is it like this? Did the Dementors get to my head?" Dumbledore examined the crimson corruption and, with a few thoughtful flicks, dispersed the stain. He added the cleaned strand to the Pensieve, and the memory dissolved into the pool, joining others. The silvery surface swirled, and Dumbledore gestured. "Shall we begin?" Sirius took a last gulp of his cooling tea and stepped forward into the Pensieve. Dumbledore nodded to Hermione. She braced herself, plunged her face into the silver, and felt the familiar vertigo of falling. Voices and shouts swelled until, in an instant, she stood beside Dumbledore, watching the memory from Sirius's vantage point. They trailed Pettigrew down that ill-fated street. Hermione saw a young couple laughing together, a child in their arms contentedly sucking a candy. She drew closer, and her breath caught. That child, a tiny Loren, had dark hair and dark eyes, wisps of curls on his forehead. He made a small noise and rolled over to sleep. Hermione's heart dropped to her stomach. Then the explosion tore the street apart. The sky seemed to rain fire and debris. Hermione watched the woman's sky-blue dress stain with blood and could not keep from crying. Tears fell without sound, striking the memory like silver drops. It felt as if something had been carved from her chest. Sirius stood frozen in the memory. His face went through a succession of expressions, none of them words. When the scene ended, Dumbledore gently steadied Hermione and drew her back out of the Pensieve. Daylight in the headmaster's office hit her like a physical thing. Sirius collapsed into a chair, whispering, I nearly killed Loren." In the Gryffindor common room, a breeze from a half-open window turned the page of an abandoned book. Loren lay curled on a couch, half asleep. A small, silvery phoenix Patronus alighted on his shoulder and pecked his ear. Dumbledore's voice echoed, "Loren, come to my office." Loren blinked awake, pushed himself up, and walked to the headmaster's office. The moment the oak door opened, Hermione flew at him and wrapped herself around him so hard he felt her through her clothes. "Loren, Loren," she sobbed into his shirt. I didn't know. The warmth of her breath and the pressure of her arms made him want to smile and cry at once. He patted her back and, half joking, whispered, "We can hug later. Someone's watching." Hermione's outrage at his lightness made her want to bite him. Loren, having composed himself, released her and looked toward the desk. "Headmaster?" "It isn't for me. It's for Sirius," Dumbledore said softly. Sirius tried to smile but failed. "I'm so sorry, Loren. I had no idea you or your family were there. By the time I knew what had happened, it was too late. I was so furious I only thought of catching that damned Pettigrew." He stammered on, pleading. Loren's face remained unreadable, his voice flat and even. "Headmaster, what do you want me to do?" Dumbledore had made his choice. "I hope the two of you might find some way to settle this peacefully. But Hermione reminded me that none of us have any right to decide for you." He stepped back to the wall, leaving the room open between the two men. "I'll leave you to speak." Sirius clutched at his hope like a lifeline. "I'll pay whatever I must. I'll make any amends. I beg you, forgive me, Mr. Morgan." Loren did not flinch. When he spoke, his voice was cold and precise. "Stop the show. Your fake contrition is ugly and nauseating." Sirius flinched as if struck. "If you were truly remorseful," Loren continued, "you wouldn't be haunted every night. You wouldn't still have that red-eyed look. You wouldn't forget the 12 muggles on that Hampshire street." He spoke not like someone shouting, but like someone reading a verdict. Sirius trembled. Words he had not wanted to admit were laid bare. "You and Pettigrew, I forgive neither of you," Loren said, the last sentence falling like a hammer. Bright sunlight poured into the quiet office, filling the room with a clear, cold light. Dumbledore stood silently by the window, leaning against the wall and feeling the faint warmth of the sun. His gaze lingered on Loren for a moment, then flicked to Hermione. His deep sapphire eyes were full of thoughts no one else could fully read. Hermione stood behind Loren, unconsciously holding his left hand. She didn't know exactly what was rattling in his mind, but she could feel how unnervingly calm, almost indifferent, he seemed. Hearing Loren's words, Sirius's memory drifted back to his youth. During the years at Grimmauld Place, he had rebelled against his family's rigid, stale ideals by embracing Muggle things. He plastered his room with posters, made friends with Muggle girls, hung out with Muggle boys. For a long time, Sirius had believed he was different from the rest of the Blacks. He told himself he didn't look down on Muggles. Yet, to his own surprise, he could hardly remember the names of the Muggle friends he'd had. Had he really been so different from his family's pure-blood supremacists? Had he really changed? If it weren't for Loren, I would never have thought of those 10 unfortunate Muggles for the rest of my life. Sirius repeated, confusion threading his voice. The scene of the street explosion, the 10 Muggles who had died, played over and over in his mind. He shook his head painedly. He couldn't answer definitively, and he refused to accept sole responsibility, so he argued stubbornly. "At the time I heard about James and Lily," Sirius began, "I lost my composure. I was furious. The only thing I could think about was making that damned Pettigrew pay." "Why should I care what you were thinking then?" Loren's tone stayed calm, almost detached. "Harry's parents died, and you had a reason to hunt Pettigrew. My parents died because of you. How should I treat you?" Hermione gripped Loren's hand, trying to steady the tremor in her own heart. Even though Loren had the claim to righteous anger, the little witch's emotions jumped more wildly than his. "That was Pettigrew's doing. I didn't know he would use that charm," Sirius insisted. "Harry's parents were killed by Lord Voldemort," Loren shot back, raising his voice. "Can you say Pettigrew was unaware? It's not all my fault. I can make amends." "Ultimately, my parents are dead," Loren cut him off. "All the arguments in the world, no matter how grand, cannot undo that. A blood debt like this, it's right that I should kill you." Anger rose in Sirius like bile. He realized, with a jolt of shame, that he had privately adopted many of the attitudes he'd once scorned. The family's contempt for Muggles had leaked into him, just as his own actions had come to resemble those of the Pettigrews he had despised. His mind seized in a knot. On an impulse, he straightened and, reckless, taunted, "Then kill me." "Sectum sempra." Loren drew his wand and swept an invisible blade forward with chilling calm. Hermione's sharp intake of breath sounded in the office as the blade sliced through the air towards Sirius's left chest. It cut through the magical robe, through skin and between ribs, aimed straight for the heart. Dumbledore, who had been watching with growing dread, could not stand by. He raised his hand and halted the flying Sectum Sempra, dispersing the dark blade. Sirius clutched his chest as crimson poured out. Shock and pain sent his adrenaline soaring. Cold sweat soaked his robes. He was skilled at bearing pain. No screams left him, but he slumped in his chair, gasping. The room fell quiet. Hermione exhaled, gripping Loren's arm so hard her knuckles whitened. For a moment she had believed Professor Black might bleed out in the headmaster's office. Though the image of Black as a reputable man had been shattered in her mind, she had not actually wanted to see someone killed. Dumbledore looked at Loren with infinite, sorrowful pity. "I cannot let you do this, Loren. For Sirius, and for you." He gestured toward the corner where Fawkes had been peeking out. The phoenix spread his wings, flew over Sirius, and squeezed 2 tears that fell onto the wound before folding back into silence. The first tear dispelled the lingering dark magic in the injury. The second began to heal. Sirius's pale face glistened with cold sweat as blood still ran from his chest to the carpet. The bright, warm gold of the velvet floor covering had darkened where it drank the blood, the color turning a brownish red. "I cannot let you do this, Loren." Dumbledore repeated quietly, as much to himself as to the boy. Emotionally, Loren had every reason to want to kill. Legally, however, Sirius's crime did not warrant death. Dumbledore could not see this 13-year-old consumed entirely by hatred. Parental love, he believed, should be a force for creation, not destruction. He would not watch Loren's soul shatter. Loren had anticipated Dumbledore's intervention and said nothing, staying rooted to the spot. The room was nearly silent, except for Sirius's heavy breaths. In the instant when death had seemed imminent, Sirius had been terrified. Decades of memories flickered before his eyes. Strange to him, he observed his own past from a detached, almost third-person perspective. He felt he ought to be guilty for the innocent muggles who had died, and he should be able to remember at least one or two names of the muggles he had once known. He forced himself to raise his head and asked, "Horse, what must I do for you to forgive me?" Loren glanced at Dumbledore, who had his hands folded over his stomach, and said nothing. Then Loren looked directly at Sirius. "From beginning to end, you come seeking my forgiveness just because I am the victim's son? Do other victims have sons? Are they also someone else's sons? Why don't you seek their forgiveness? Why should I forgive you? Why should the families of the victims forgive you?" Sirius floundered. "Besides the dead, who has the right to forgive you?" Loren's voice rose, edged with emotion. Sirius was stunned. He had never thought about these things. He could only slump in the chair and watch the spreading stain on the carpet. Dumbledore lowered his head as well, looking at the blood. In that stain, he saw faces, Jellerts, among others, people who had once justified killing in the name of a so-called greater good. Wizards, muggles, guilty and innocent, parents and children. No one could forgive on behalf of the dead, Dumbledore thought. Sirius will go into Muggle society, he said finally. He will find the families of those victims and try to mend what he can, seek their forgiveness. No magic will be used in that process. I will bind him with an unbreakable vow. He looked at Loren. Once he has obtained that forgiveness, he will come back to you to seek your forgiveness. At that time, you may decide whether or not to take your revenge. Loren, will that be acceptable? Dumbledore's voice softened, pleading. Loren pursed his lips. From his pocket, he drew a small, petal-shaped mirror. He tapped its surface with his wand, drawing forth a wisp of dark crimson light. He guided the spell with steady hands and pointed it at Sirius. The crimson magic shot toward him. This time, Dumbledore did not stop him. Never appear before me until the red veins in your eyes disappear, Loren said. He then took Hermione's hand and turned to leave. They walked out of the headmaster's office and down the corridor. Hermione asked, Are we going back to the Gryffindor common room? I don't know. Loren's answer was blunt. He didn't know where he wanted to go. He didn't want to go back. He wasn't as calm as he'd seemed. Inside his head was a mess of thoughts. He held Hermione's hand and walked on without deciding where they were going. Hermione watched the back of his head, curiosity edging forward. What was that magic from the mirror, and what do the red veins mean? If the red veins fade, it means he found the answers, Loren said. Hermione nodded thoughtfully and then asked softly, You didn't actually mean to kill Professor Black, did you? Rationally, I know he doesn't deserve to die, Loren admitted. Emotionally, I think he deserves death 1,000 times over. I let my rationality win just now. He sounded almost capable of mocking himself, and that struck Hermione with fresh sorrow. She quickened her step to match his pace, clasping his hand with both of hers as if to pass warmth along. Are you sad? Loren was quiet for a moment. It's all right. I only recovered those memories at the start of my second year, and I only spent a year with them. I was often asleep during that time. Harry is similar. He can hardly remember anything from before he was 1 year old. He avoided saying Mom and Dad, as if the words themselves hurt. Hermione held his hand tighter. So are you sad? His chest felt cramped and uncomfortable, but there was a steady warmth from her palm that spread through him. He slowed, then stopped. He tried to come up with some flippant remark to break the tension, but nothing came. Not wanting Hermione to see his face, he turned his head and looked out a corridor window. The forbidden forest lay green and deep in spring sunlight, bright and lush beneath the clear sky. Hermione pressed up against his back. The scent of lavender clung to her robe. In the light, she smelled poignantly of the young man's sorrow. After a moment, Hermione steered them in a different direction and led him up another staircase. Below the castle clock tower, they slipped into an open-air attic's roof gallery where the Black Lake, the Forbidden Forest, and the castle's towers were visible. In their first year, she had dragged Loren here because she had mistakenly feared he was a werewolf. Just as she had then, she guided him to sit with their feet dangling over the edge. A cool breeze swept through, still carrying the mild chill of spring sunlight. Hermione inhaled deeply and felt a little better. "Do you remember this place?" she asked. Loren breathed in and out. "I remember. In first year, someone was ostracized by a roommate and hid here to cry." Hermione wanted to smack him, but he deserved a little pity now. "And someone was anxious every full moon," she said. "Someone mistakenly thought others were werewolves and cried from fright," he shot back. "I didn't cry." "You did. You." They laughed softly, the wind making mistletoe beads shimmer on a crabapple branch nearby. Loren lay back and chatted idly with Hermione. The tension in him eased and he fell asleep before he knew it. Hermione noticed after a while that he had gone still. She turned and saw him sleeping, quiet, vulnerable. She didn't move. Lying on her side, she watched his peaceful expression. He looked better like this, not talking. After a while, she looked away to get a book from the pendant at her throat, then realized one of her hands was still clasped in his. She tried to ease her fingers free without waking him, but couldn't. Using her left hand, she pulled out Human Transfiguration, Transformation and Fixation from her storage, placed it on her lap, and awkwardly began to flip through it. Loren woke up later. Night had fallen. Pale blue flames drifted like unfurled silk above the courtyard, offering a little light. Hermione's face was very close, her eyes wide. "What are you looking at?" he asked, stretching and turning. He fumbled to sit up and discovered to his embarrassment that he was still holding her hand. It felt warm and slightly damp, sweat from being held so tightly in his sleep. His cheeks heated. Playing it off, he complained, "When we came here, my mind was elsewhere, and I forgot to let go. Why didn't you pull your hand away? Look, it's all sweaty." Hermione snapped her hand free and smacked the back of his hand with a solid little slap. "I tried. Every time I moved, you'd get anxious and squeeze tighter." He made a face, half apologetic, half sheepish. "I didn't want to portray Sirius as purely evil," the narrator might have said to herself. Rather, she wanted to show the yawning divide between wizards and muggles, to highlight a common perception. In the wider magical world, even wizards who insisted they didn't despise muggles often still saw them as different and inferior. The fountain at the Ministry of Magic hinted at this. Aside from wizards themselves, everyone else was tacitly ranked beneath them. Bright magical candles burned, cutting through the mist in the greenhouse. The runes carved into the walls and dome glowed with a comforting warmth. Most of them symbolized the sun, warmth, and nurturing life, interlocked to maintain the temperature and humidity inside. Loren stood at the edge of the mandrake bed, his earmuffs pressed tight over his ears to block every outside sound. The quiet helped calm his slightly restless mind. Mandrakes, Mandragora, Atropa mandragora, are said to have originated around the Mediterranean and are grown the world over. They are highly poisonous. The screams that erupt from their human-shaped roots can be fatal. But mandrakes are not only destructive. Mature specimens can be used to make potions that undo petrification. Their leaves are remarkable too. The first step in animagus training is to hold a mandrake leaf in the mouth for a month. Herbology and transfiguration have long speculated about mandrakes. Transfiguration tends to view them as breakers of form, creatures that can disrupt petrification and alter human form. Herbology sees in them an essence akin to human nature, the roots' humanoid shapes, their life stages from infancy to old age. There may be some supreme truth hidden in their growth, a link between life and death, but so far no one has made a decisive breakthrough. Philosophers have offered many theories, none with practical value. Perhaps the secret of the elixir of life or some clue to the philosopher's stone lies here. Perhaps not. Loren shook his head and forced his scattered thoughts back to the plants in front of him. During the Easter holiday, some of the faster-growing mandrakes had finished adolescence. The dense pimples on their human-shaped roots had smoothed into rough freckles. They cursed constantly and were impatient to be moved into larger pots. Professor Sprout wanted students with top herbology marks who had finished their holiday assignments early to help repot them. Professor McGonagall had also asked Hermione to gather single mandrake leaves for Animagus class. So Loren, Hermione, Neville, and Rolf had been drafted. After burying a mandrake and loosening the soil around it, Loren picked up the watering can and gave it a few careful turns. Sprout's diluted nutrient solution smelled indescribably foul, like a month-old meat broth blended with fermented cheese and a pair of moldy socks. Fortunately, the mandrakes drank it quickly, and Loren only had to endure the stench for the few seconds of watering. Hermione moved down the aisle between beds, checking each plant, identifying the human-shaped roots that had matured, marking them and leaving them for repotting. She wore the plain yellow gardener's uniform, the slightly oversized fabric belted at her narrow waist, giving her a neat, purposeful look. Her earmuffs were snug, making her head look small and accentuating the seriousness of her face, which only made her seem cuter. Loren finished watering and set the can down. He felt a tap on his shoulder. Hermione stood there, nose wrinkled with disgust at the smell, eyebrows tightly drawn. Despite the stench she was bearing with it, she pulled Loren closer, brushed the hair away from his ears, and waved a hand in front of his face. Loren stood obediently while she checked the seals of his earmuffs for gaps. She'd been doing this since they left the headmaster's office, following him to meals, to homework, to revisions. Except for bathroom breaks and sleep, she was almost never far from him. Professor Flitwick's invitation to teach her had been postponed. Hermione suspected Loren had been pretending to be brave, hiding his tears, and she fussed over him because she didn't want him to suffer alone. Loren had tried to explain many times, but Hermione always insisted he was stubborn. After a while, he stopped arguing. Being cared for wasn't so bad. Once Neville and Rolf finished repotting, they left, and Loren and Hermione stayed to gather the mandrake leaves for Animagus class. They couldn't take off their earmuffs, so they communicated with gestures, a blend of mime and sign language. Loren pointed to the right bed and then to himself. He would take the right side. Hermione nodded and held up 4 fingers, then 2, indicating 40 portions, half for each of them. Understanding each other perfectly, they set to work. At the very edge of the bed, a pot of mandrake whose pimples hadn't quite healed yet swayed lazily, unaware of the danger. Loren seized his chance and snipped a single leaf with the scissors. It fell into his hand, and he dropped it into the cloth bag at his belt. Part of the root's face was exposed, staring blankly at him. For a moment, Loren thought he could see grievance in its expression. The tiny mouth puckered, and the plant began to shriek. Loren had already turned away and started on the next one. The earmuffs left him deaf to its cries. Mandrakes were vain about their hair. Whether they were in adolescence or fully mature, one snip brought a deadly scream. He counted as he worked, 17, 18, 19, and realized he was still 1 leaf short from his share. He scanned the bed. One of the earlier plants had exhausted itself and lay listless in the pot. Loren tiptoed over and, without attracting attention, plucked a single leaf. The mandrake wailed even more miserably than before, but Loren heard nothing through the earmuffs. He finished with a nod of satisfaction and went to meet Hermione. After changing into their normal clothes and washing up, they walked out of the greenhouse together. Hermione carried the bag of mandrake leaves, more than McGonagall had requested. She'd kept extras, while a key to the greenhouse hung in her other hand, intended for Professor McGonagall so they wouldn't have to return it to Professor Sprout in person. On the path back to the castle, Hermione chattered about the day at the Ministry of Magic, the time room in the Department of Mysteries, and the power of time. Loren, curious, took the bag from her and asked about the time turner. Hermione's face lit up. It was a delicate hourglass, Dumbledore had said, meant to resolve scheduling conflicts. No need to worry about taking a full course load. Professors had ways of arranging it. The course sign-up period isn't over yet, she said eagerly. Let's take a full load together next year. We won't miss a single class. Loren shuddered. Horrifying, he muttered. He was interested in the time turner, but not in doubling up on classes. He'd borrow Hermione's to study later, but the idea of a packed schedule was out of the question. I'm studying ancient runes on my own. I don't care for Muggle studies, he said. It's not a time thing. I'm just lazy. Hermione slapped him in exasperation. Knowing she couldn't change his mind, she moved on. Dumbledore and Mad-Eye Moody went to the Hall of Prophecy, she said in a lower voice. We split from them in the time room. Mr. Weasley took me to a trial. It's complicated, but the important part is the Hall of Prophecy. There's something there to do with, she named Voldemort in a whisper, and Dumbledore was very worried about it. He was the main reason they went to the Ministry. We sneaked in. Mr. Weasley helped disguise us, and Mr. Moody helped bypass the wand checkpoint. Loren frowned and put the pieces together. Dumbledore probably learned from Snape that Voldemort only knew half of a prophecy and suspected Voldemort would be interested in the rest. With Pettigrew's strange escape, Dumbledore had reason to worry that Voldemort had agents in the Ministry. If the prophecy orb were to fall into the wrong hands, it could be dangerous. Dumbledore had gone to check, and keeping identities hidden was to avoid alerting Voldemort or reminding him of what he might not remember. I think I know what the Hall of Prophecy is, Loren said thoughtfully, then hesitated. I shouldn't. Then don't say anything. Hermione cut in bluntly, but she paused afterward, a familiar look crossing her face. She was on the verge of remembering something revealing. Her expression hardened and she glared at Loren. It was the basilisk. You knew about it from the start, she accused suddenly. You watched me brew the polyjuice potion. You saw me drink it with cat hair in it. No wonder you looked so strange then. You must have known everything. Heat rose in her face as the memory unfolded. The shame of having turned into a cat stung again. Loren panicked. That's slander, he protested. Dumbledore told me to keep the basilisk matter secret. I couldn't say anything. And how would I have known about the cat hair? I didn't. I can't predict the future. He began edging away as he argued. Hermione, furious, chased him. Then why are you running? She shouted. If you don't chase me, I won't run, he called back. If you don't run, I won't chase, she shot over her shoulder. I don't believe you, she yelled. Stop, he shouted. The argument dissolved into panting footsteps and wild stubbornness. At the Quidditch pitch, the Gryffindor team was practicing newly prepared tactics before their match against Hufflepuff after the Easter break. They now had 3 top-grade brooms. The fastest, Nimbus 2001, was assigned to Harry as Seeker, plus 2 Nimbus 2000s. Oliver Wood experimented with different lineups, trying to find the best distribution. One contentious suggestion had come from Ron: give one of the Nimbus 2000s to the Keeper. Wood thought it was clever, but the rest of the team, except the Keeper, wasn't convinced. From the stands, Ron watched the greenhouse path, his gaze drifting toward Hermione and Loren. He saw Hermione steadily closing in, then leap onto Loren's back. The sight was messy enough that Ron quickly looked away, not because he didn't care, but because there was nothing he could do. With Seeker practice over, Harry came to sit with Ron in the stands, enjoying the breeze. The focus on scoring wasn't on the Seeker after all. Harry sighed. Your dad drove the flying car away yesterday, he said, and Sirius left on the motorcycle. The pitch has been so quiet. Ron harumphed. He suspected Percy had tipped off his father about the car. Percy had been threatened by Fred and George with some unsavory secret. The twins had been too cocky, and Percy preferred fighting back in his own way. Fortunately, this time the whole family was tangled up and the twins were the main culprits. Mrs. Weasley's howler might not be aimed just at one son. Why did Sirius suddenly leave? Ron asked. Harry shook his head. He said he had debts to repay and things to sort out. Debts? Ron blinked. He's rich. What could he owe? I asked him, Harry said. He said I couldn't get involved. Just study hard and treasure your time with friends. Mysterious, like Dumbledore. 251. The holiday is over. Inside the Gryffindor boys' dormitory, Harry and Ron sat on the carpet by their beds, hunched over parchment and writing furiously. From now on, during holidays, I'll finish my homework before I play, Harry declared. Me too. Anyone who doesn't do their homework first is a dog, Ron agreed. The last time someone said not doing homework made them a troll. I won't say who, a voice teased. Huh? Harry squinted at Ron, puzzled. They were sitting side by side, copying from the same textbook, and Ron's teasing tone made him wonder what was going on. Ron was knuckling down on his work, fingers cramped, looking miserable. Why? He groaned. It felt like the holiday only started yesterday, and it's ending tomorrow. Harry was indignant. Why is Easter shorter than Christmas, but there's almost 3 times as much homework? Seamus and Neville were lounging on their beds, watching with obvious glee. "Who told you to spend all your time on the Quidditch pitch?" Seamus said. "You know Loren and Neville finished their homework in less than 2 days." He shifted, making the bed creak as he relaxed, and clicked his tongue. "You should really be thanking Loren and Neville. Taking care of Professor Sprout's mandrakes was supposed to be your job." Neville scratched his head and offered a half smile. "It's fine. At least the 3 of us earned Gryffindor 45 points." "Exactly," Ron muttered, then leaned forward to look more closely at the notes he was copying. He squinted and shouted, "Loren, come here. What did you write here? Your handwriting's dreadful. I can't make it out." "Which homework?" Loren asked without hurry, propped on his bed and settling another page into his book, Defense Against the Dark Arts. Seamus's eyes lit up. Professor Black left, and Headmaster Dumbledore never announced a new teacher at the feast. So we don't have to do the Defense Against the Dark Arts homework, right? Ron's hesitation lasted only half a second before a delighted grin spread across his face. "Oh, that's great, isn't it?" Harry rolled his eyes. Ron always said one thing and meant another. "Then why did you stop writing?" Loren closed his book and stared out the dormitory window into the dark night. Compared to the long summer and Christmas breaks, Easter had slipped away quietly. On a regular Monday in April, Hogwarts resumed classes. Transfiguration was the first lesson of the morning. After recent curriculum changes, the subject covered a broader range of topics, though each in less depth. Advanced material had been moved into higher-level Transfiguration or club classes. For students who had no intention of specializing in Transfiguration, the course had become much easier. "The process for transfiguring mouse fur officially ends here," Professor McGonagall said, tapping the podium. "A similar method can be applied to other small furry creatures, like rabbits or cats." Her wand tapped rhythmically. "A post-class thought exercise. Can the above method be applied to bird feathers or to fish and snake scales? What are the similarities and differences between these types of transfiguration? This isn't formal homework. You don't need to hand in an essay. If you're interested, discuss it among yourselves." At the final sentence, many students who had been dutifully writing the question down put their quills away and visibly relaxed. Homework that didn't have to be submitted was homework that didn't have to be done. Loren glanced at Hermione. She was still copying the question in her neat handwriting. He smiled faintly, packed his books into his bag, and prepared to leave. Just as the class was breaking up, Professor McGonagall called out, "Oh, by the way, members of the Animagus class, please note that this afternoon's Defense Against the Dark Arts period will be used for the Animagus class. Be on time." "Yes, Professor McGonagall," a chorus of students answered. McGonagall had spent the last open lesson explaining the value, difficulty, and risks of becoming an animagus. The dangers had not dampened enthusiasm. Not a single member of the class dropped out. Even those who were uncertain wanted to attend formal instruction first before deciding. Loren was a little surprised to find that Beetle had indeed become the assistant. Rita Skeeter still wore a black mask. Her chaotic blonde curls were somewhat tamed. The gaudy, jewel-framed glasses were gone, replaced by thin, black-rimmed spectacles much like Professor McGonagall's, and her long, painted nails had been trimmed. She carried a stack of booklets and passed one to each student before moving to the edge of the podium to stand quietly. When Loren opened the booklet, he found 13 pages full of moving pictures. The ink had been prepared with a developing potion, so images shifted and flowed on the slightly yellowed parchment. Owl, crow, reticulated python, beetle, black dog, tabby cat, alligator, haddock, hedgehog, cheetah, cobra, mouse, werewolf. 13 figures continuously transformed into 13 animals, then back again. Though some faces were concealed, Loren recognized many of them. The reticulated python, Nagini, the beetle, Rita, the black dog, Sirius, the tabby cat, Professor McGonagall, the mouse, Peter Pettigrew. Loren brushed a fingertip over the ink, but the illustration did not change. The magically printed booklet had no type impression. The parchment felt nicely damp to the touch. He admired Professor McGonagall's thoroughness. The album covered flying birds, slithering snakes, four-legged beasts, even amphibians. Hermione also recognized several people and looked up at Loren, then quickly lowered her head to keep looking. Gasps rippled through the class as students watched the transformations. "Quiet, listen first," Professor McGonagall said, tapping her wand against the desk to quiet them. "These images were collected from various sources," she explained. "Among the 13, only the owl, crow, beetle, black dog, tabby cat, alligator, and mouse represent genuine animagi. Some of the people depicted I invited to record their transformations, and the image of the mouse comes from the Ministry's criminal archives. I'm sure you've recognized some familiar faces." Fred was the first to shout, "I know, the black dog's Professor Black, and the tabby cat is you." Excited chatter broke out. George grinned and directed a look at the pale Percy. "And our dear mouse scabbers." Percy sat straight and breathed deeply, forcing himself not to think about distant, uncomfortable memories. Professor McGonagall went on, "The reticulated python is a maledictus. Focus only on her transformation process. The haddock is the unfortunate witch Mirabella Plunkett. Some of you may have heard her story. This illustration is a diagram reconstructed by transfiguration scholars and arithmancers to determine her whereabouts." "That's the card I got from a chocolate frog at Christmas," one student said. "They never found her afterward. She probably drowned in Loch Lomond," another replied. "How dreadful." McGonagall waited until the chatter died down. "The cheetah and cobra are images of wizards from the African continent. Their principles of human transfiguration differ from animagus practice, but we can learn from them. The hedgehog on the third page is the eldest son of the dark wizard Thaddeus Thurkle. You're seeing the moment Aurors rescued him and he returned to human form. Notice his eyes. The prolonged animal form allowed the beast's brain to overwhelm the human mind. Instincts suppressed reason. Take this image as a warning. The last picture shows a werewolf transformation. Study the feral intensity in that scene. This understanding of savagery versus rationality is crucial for a key step in becoming an animagus." McGonagall emphasized the contrast between wildness and reason as she walked through the album, directing the students' attention to the hedgehog and werewolf pictures until they'd had a chance to take it in. "Now some precautions." Her expression turned grave and quiet. The room fell silent. "This album may be viewed by other students outside the class, but unauthorized copying is forbidden and it must not be taken out of school. It is warded against duplication and will self-ignite if removed beyond the grounds. Anyone who breaks these rules will be expelled from the class and will never be readmitted." From her tone, the students understood the seriousness of it and promised to comply. Finally, let's give a round of applause to Assistant Beetle. Her magical printing technique made this album possible. Most of the students applauded enthusiastically. Many had heard of Rita Skeeter in the Daily Prophet, but not every name linked to her sensationalist reputation. Only Hermione's eyes flicked to Loren with clear puzzlement. Loren put a finger to his lips and mouthed, "Shh! Professor McGonagall must have her reasons." Hermione pursed her lips and, reminded she was in class, refocused on learning. Professor McGonagall called on Hermione by name. "Hermione, I'm here." Hermione sat up. McGonagall handed her a small cloth bag. "Hand out the mandrake leaves, one per student." "Okay," Hermione said, and quickly distributed the delicate leaves. Everyone who took a leaf cradled it with care, trying to contain their excitement. "I assume you've all reviewed the first step of the animagus ritual," McGonagall said. "I'll repeat it. Place a mandrake leaf in your mouth from one full moon to the next. For an entire month, you must continuously hold a single mandrake leaf in your mouth. You must never swallow the leaf or remove it. If it leaves your mouth, the process must be started over. These leaves are for this month. Those who fail will have to re-register and collect new leaves next time. Any questions?" She looked around the room. Fred shot his hand up. "Professor, what if I accidentally bite the leaf? Then it fails, and you must start over at the next full moon." George raised his hand. "Professor, can I hold more than one leaf at once? Will that increase the chances?" "No, the ritual must be followed exactly." "Professor, what if I swallow it by accident and then put it back?" "No." "Professor, can I use a sticking charm?" Loren could only stare at the imaginative ideas his older classmates came up with. Those who had gotten in had talent. Professor McGonagall answered each creative question patiently, always the same reply: no. There were no shortcuts. After confirming that the students had no other clever schemes, she made the final arrangement. Tomorrow, Tuesday, is the full moon. You may start holding the leaf as soon as the moon has risen, but no later than midnight. She explained a few more basic precautions, then, as soon as the bell rang, packed the remaining leaves into the cloth bag and left with brisk, decisive steps. Rita gathered up the albums and followed toward McGonagall's office. Most of them will fail, Rita said in a low voice, certain. McGonagall didn't look back. I know. In the classroom, Hermione double-checked her notes and closed her notebook. She looked at Loren, puzzled. Don't you think it's a bit strange? Professor McGonagall explained the ritual and precautions so carefully, but then she told us to find our own time to start holding the leaf. Given her meticulous nature, Loren said with a small laugh, you'd think she'd supervise us starting it, wouldn't you? Hermione nodded. It's to let us learn from failure, Loren said, and to make those who aren't serious retreat once they see how difficult it is. Restrain the urge to speak. Replace brushing your teeth with the whirlwind sweep spell. Place the mandrake leaf on the upper palate beneath the root of the tongue. Avoid the areas beside the molars. Eat foods that don't require chewing, porridge, broth. I'm not sure pudding counts, so I won't eat pudding for a month. We'll see how it goes after that. Hermione pored over the notes she'd copied from some old book, committing them to memory in silence. Loren sat on the courtyard steps, glancing at her pages from time to time. A few other students from the Animagus class milled around, carefully cradling mandrake leaves in their hands, waiting in the courtyard for the moon to break free from the cloud cover. A handful of extra cautious pupils were posted by the observatory, having joined the stargazing class. They peered through telescopes to make sure the moon was really on the rise. Hermione's pale fingers hesitated over a line of text, and a flicker of doubt crossed her face. She looked up and asked, Can we use whirlwind sweep on our teeth? Will it shred the mandrake leaf? If you're unsure, don't use the cleaning spell, Loren said. Better safe than sorry. He leaned his head against a pillar, and with a sudden mischievous smile added, Why not just skip brushing your teeth entirely? If it's only for a month, you're unlikely to get cavities. Ew, Hermione sniffed. If you stop brushing, I won't speak to you. Both of Hermione's parents were dentists. She knew the consequences of poor oral hygiene. A month might not be enough to rot teeth, but it would certainly invite unpleasant smells. Loren's eyes widened. Wait, so if I don't brush, you won't talk to me? You only came near me for my fresh breath? Hermione rolled her eyes and turned back to her notes. Loren, not ready to drop it, grabbed her arm and persisted. Tell me, are you planning to steal my lime orange toothpaste? Don't damage my mandrake leaf, she snapped and smacked his hand. He slapped back and soon they were scuffling on the steps, trading light smacks while waiting for moonlight. Not far off, George peered suspiciously from behind a bush. Are there mosquitoes this early? It isn't even summer. Fred, crouched nearby and examining the leaf in his hand as if for potions properties, replied casually, It's April. Mosquitoes happen. Once their hands both had a red hue from slaps, Loren tired of the game, partly because Hermione's slaps were stronger than his, and partly because he liked her too much to push it further. Hermione checked her mandrake leaf, sighed with a complicated expression, and tried to settle down. She had planned to nurture the leaf carefully for the initiation ritual and spend the month being extremely cautious. Loren's brand of mischief made that difficult. With him around, she had a bad feeling about how the ritual would go. Loren, meanwhile, was in better spirits. He enjoyed the courtyard breeze, glanced at Hermione's notes now and then, and idly rolled a green leaf between his fingers. All the books said Animagus training was a long-term, grand project. Studies measured in years. Even talented groups like the Marauders had taken 3 years. Some wizards never managed it at all. The ritual itself was brief. Holding the mandrake leaf in the mouth was the short part. But the waiting could be long, because one needed a thunderstorm with lightning. Britain's climate provided enough storms, so the most time was spent learning transfiguration theory and building mental endurance. Professor McGonagall had covered much relevant material, but she hadn't moved fast enough for a lot of students to attempt the ritual now. Perhaps that was deliberate, to make them understand the difficulty, to quell impatience and excitement. In short, nobody was expected to complete the first step in a month. There were too many variables. Loren wasn't worried. He relaxed and enjoyed the evening. About 10 minutes later, the moon broke free from the clouds and a clean stream of moonlight poured into the courtyard. Under that light, the mandrake leaf in Loren's hand seemed to change. Its veins spread, the tiny hairs on its surface prickled. He noticed immediately. The texture felt a little coarser. The plant magic inside stirred, but had not reached full vigor. Loren's eyes shone with a small surprise, and without thinking much, he popped the leaf into his mouth. It was cool and smelled of green grass. No sap leaked, so it had little taste. Hermione watched him, curiosity bright in her eyes. "What does it taste like?" "Chocolate," Loren said. Hermione rolled her eyes, then placed her own leaf in her mouth, pursed her lips, and chewed the barest fraction. "Mine is strawberry," she said slowly. "You're lying," Loren protested. "Humph," she sniffed. Across the corridor, George and Fred held their leaves up to the light, attempting, without much confidence, to analyze them with their rudimentary potion knowledge. When that proved fruitless, they tucked the leaves back into small boxes and pockets by unspoken agreement. George's eyes darted a couple of times. "Professor McGonagall said we just need to have it in our mouths before midnight, right?" Fred grinned. "Let's go tickle Percy's armpit. He won't be able to help himself." "He'll have to cover his mouth," George added, and the pair dissolved into conspiratorial laughter. Soon Percy's pained, awkward laughter echoed through the courtyard, an odd sound that mixed pain, embarrassment, and anger, and Cedric nearby hastened away from the twins' particular brand of chaos. Over the next few nights, the moon crept toward fullness. Its crescent widened day by day until it filled the sky. Under the changing moonlight, the mandrake's pulse altered, a subtle frequency of magic that shifted and, for Loren, gradually converged toward the rhythm of the magic in his own body. They did not become identical, rather, they settled into a complementary harmony. There were only about 30 students in the animagus class. After the open lesson, the excitement it caused faded, and other topics took over in the common room, chiefly the upcoming Quidditch match against Hufflepuff. "We've been training every night," Harry said over a bowl of chickpeas, a confident grin on his face. "With a Nimbus 2001, I can nail the Plimpton pass, and the Hawkhead attack formation is solid. I don't think the Gryffindor team has ever been this confident about the cup." "Shh! Don't reveal our tactics," Ron hissed, glancing around as if strategies might leak out. Loren, cutting his steak, chimed in. "Captain Wood, George and Fred are in the animagus class, aren't they? Can they even shout on the pitch with mandrake leaves in their mouths?" Wood hadn't started the ritual because of Quidditch commitments, but George and Fred had. Harry hesitated, then said, when Percy woke up the next morning, he found his leaf had a missing corner. He chased them from the first floor to the 8th and back again, terrified and furious. Ron chuckled at the memory. George and Fred couldn't slip away through any secret passage. They were found and given a proper thrashing. Angelina said their leaves were spat right out by the force of it. By the end of the week, more than half the class had been knocked out of the running. Some people accidentally swallowed their leaves while eating or sleeping. Others spat them out while brushing or rinsing. Then, there were the Weasley twins. They told jokes loudly, frightened classmates into dropping leaves, jumped out of corners to startle anyone holding one near their mouths, and had even made a deal with Peeves. Neville took careful note and resolved to avoid them for a month. At the Gryffindor table, Loren idly turned the mandrake leaf in his mouth while he watched his steak. Hermione gripped his arm, face serious. "Don't eat anything that requires chewing. You could damage the leaf." Hermione's own bowl contained unchewable fare, fruit oatmeal, soft stewed ribs, thin slices of bacon that melted in the mouth. Loren looked at her and couldn't help but ask, "You've been living on this for almost a week. Aren't you tired of it? Don't you want to chew?" His forkful of steak waved temptingly in front of Hermione. The warm, meaty aroma seemed to tug at her attention. Her gums itched and her mouth filled with saliva. She swallowed against it. No, I'm fine. For animagus, She opened to continue, and Loren seized the moment. He shoved the steak against her lips, then yanked the fork away as her teeth closed instinctively. The savory juices flooded her tongue, and the taste memory hit her hard. Hermione couldn't chew. She dared not. She made a small, pitiful slurping sound and looked at him with pleading eyes. Loren's grin faded, and he offered, genuinely, "Move the leaf to the left side of your cheek and chew on the right." Hermione cupped her hands over her mouth and, with delicate care, shifted the leaf. It took 5 minutes and a great deal of effort, but she managed the piece of beef without damaging her mandrake. Loren calmly continued cutting his steak as if nothing had happened. "Was it good?" he asked. Hermione's gaze faltered, and she flushed. "Want another piece?" "No, go away," she snapped, burying her face in her oatmeal. But the small, forbidden indulgence had awakened something. Her bland, unchewable meals tasted even duller now. How long could she hold out? The Quidditch pitch was packed on match day. Professor McGonagall sat beside Lee Jordan. In the Slytherin front row, the soon-to-retire Care of Magical Creatures professor, Kettleburn, sighed nostalgically. "This is probably one of the last matches I'll watch at Hogwarts. Time flies, doesn't it, Severus?" Snape's expression was unreadable. "Perhaps you should discuss that with Professor McGonagall." Other faculty were scattered in the staff section or sitting among the front rows of Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. Kettleburn leaned towards Snape and, in the tone of an old man with a twinkle in his eye, said, "Severus, give me some basilisk materials. Half a box of each will do. I promise I won't use them for any dangerous hybridization experiments. I've never dreamed of breeding a cockatrice with basilisk parts." Snape's eyelids twitched. He respected Kettleburn after decades of service to Hogwarts, but he didn't believe a word of that. "It's not that I'm unwilling," he said dryly. "But those materials are earmarked for potion markets in Africa. Many wizarding communities there venerate snake totems. Basilisks are excellent trading material." Kettleburn sighed in mock disappointment and turned his attention back to the match, while the game began to unfold beneath the bright, watchful moon. 253. See again Wolfsbane potion. Because Loren had a mandrake leaf tucked in his mouth, he wasn't in any shape to be a commentator. Hermione, more cautious than anyone, worried someone would jostle him when a goal was scored, so she cleverly pulled him over to sit in the Ravenclaw section. Compared with the boisterous Gryffindor stands, that side was much quieter. The surrounding students were deep in discussions about magic theory, potion recipes, and the riddles of the Bronze Eagle Knocker, which made the Gryffindor stands feel all the livelier by contrast. "Cho, quickly. What animal has feet but can't walk?" "Last night I couldn't answer, and nearly got locked out of the common room by that bronze knocker," Padma Patil asked the girl next to her. Cho Chang was striking, with long glossy black hair and dark eyes. Her features had an exotic, slightly mysterious quality that made people look twice. Before she could answer, Marietta Edgecombe tossed her reddish-blonde ponytail and said with a sniff of superiority, "A kangaroo, obviously. You couldn't even think of that." "Well, maybe it's not entirely your fault. You're from India, right? You probably haven't been to Australia. You might not even know what a kangaroo looks like." Padma flushed with anger, speechless. Cho watched her friend helplessly. Marietta's mother worked at the ministry's flu network office. Marietta had grown spoiled and thought nothing of offending others. Cho didn't believe she meant real harm, just vanity and a habit of showing off. But it still stung. Cho patted Padma's hand and offered, "Kangaroos move by hopping on their 2 feet and using their tails for balance. But it's not just kangaroos. Frogs, dragonflies, and toads move by jumping or flying too." "Don't mind her," Cho added softly. "She's like that, no malice intended." Padma drew back, lips pressed together, and moved to the corner to sit by Hermione and Loren. Studying in Britain from India, she came from a well-off family and was also Professor Flitwick's assistant. Marietta's remark had made her uncomfortable. Hermione, meanwhile, had resumed her quiet tallying of house points on her fingers. "Counting the points we earned over Easter, we're ahead by more than 180, Hermione muttered, surprised. "Professor Snape's deductions have been much less than I expected recently." Loren shifted the leaf in his mouth with his tongue and said, "Perhaps he realized how biased the House Cup is. With a headmaster like Dumbledore, Slytherin hasn't really had a chance the last few years." Headmaster Dumbledore is not that kind of person, Hermione snapped. Padma scowled and slid a little farther away. This wasn't conversation she wanted to overhear. The stands at the Quidditch pitch were divided by house, but no one minded if you sat elsewhere. When their teams weren't playing, Ravenclaws and other students often drifted into the Gryffindor section to share its contagious enthusiasm. Luna and Ginny sat together in the back row, holding a banner and watching as the Gryffindor players gathered. Captain Wood was laying out the strategy for the match. Oliver Wood put both hands on the Weasley twins' shoulders and looked at Harry. Harry, the toughest opponent will be Cedric. Don't let him catch the snitch first. Leave the rest to us. Harry nodded with determination. He wasn't the nervous rookie he had been last year. His nerves were steady and his spirit fired up. George grinned. Don't worry. We're old friends with Cedric. We'll make sure he gets a warm welcome. Fred mused aloud and clicked his tongue. It's a shame the basilisk's gone. Otherwise, they'd be too scared to get near you. Get too close and you'd be petrified. The team laughed. The Gryffindor players were relaxed and confident. Hufflepuff were strong, but not as practiced. The only real threat was that Cedric Diggory had more match experience than Harry. Still, Harry's Nimbus 2001 helped close the gap. Wood, after some debate, had agreed to Ron's suggestion that the keeper use a Nimbus 2000 for tactical practice. Wood insisted it was purely tactical, not because of favoritism. Madam Hooch's whistle cut through the air, and 14 brooms shot up as the teams took to the sky. Angelina Johnson snatched the quaffle first on her Nimbus 2000, followed closely by Katie Bell and Alicia Spinnet in a tight formation that punched through Hufflepuff's defense. The Weasleys supported the attack, and the goal was neat and clean. Hufflepuff struggled to organize counterattacks. Their passes were frequently intercepted, and when they did break through, they rarely scored before Gryffindor reasserted control. Wood's interceptions on his Nimbus 2000 were devastating. In just over 10 minutes, the score difference careened toward 150 points. Cedric hovered above the pitch, brow furrowed, breath quickening as he scanned for the golden snitch. The snitch was worth 150 points. If the gap reached that, catching it would be too little too late. Not far from him, Harry watched Cedric with a serious expression. He respected Cedric as a fellow seeker. Even with the advantage of his Nimbus 2001, Harry found Cedric hard to shake. He could sometimes use the broom's straight-line speed to open up distance, but Cedric would counter with feints that suggested the snitch was near him, forcing Harry to pull back and reverse. It wasn't just flying skill, it was match experience and psychological pressure, and Harry realized how much he still had to learn. After the match, the other Hufflepuff players had already left. They weren't overly dejected. Defeat had been fair. Cedric stayed behind to return the team's brooms to storage. George and Fred swaggered into the empty changing room in their bright red Gryffindor robes. How about that? Our eagle-head offensive formation is brilliant, right? George draped an arm over Cedric's shoulder, pride barely hid in his tone. Fred put his other arm around Cedric. We planned to use it against Slytherin, but you lot got a trial run. Cedric smiled despite himself and pushed the twins' bimber hands away as he changed out of his canary yellow robe. Slytherin's whole team has Nimbus 2001s, he said, reaching for his robes in the locker. Your eagle-head formation won't be as effective against them. His voice had an odd lilt in places. The twins exchanged glances. George's eyes widened. You're not still holding a mandrake leaf, are you? Fred's expression mirrored his brother's shock. How did you train with a leaf in your mouth? Cedric shrugged, pulling on his wizard robes. I'm the seeker. I don't take part in tactics much, and I don't have to shout on the pitch. His words made the twins remember their pranks. Suddenly alert, Cedric took a cautious step back, eyeing them warily. George forced a friendlier smile. We're not going to prank you, honest. Cedric didn't relax. Fred leaned in and whispered, We've got something else to ask. Summer homework answers? For other years too? It's not even summer yet. George interrupted. Are you two saving up to open a joke shop? Cedric replied dryly. Fine, I'll give you an extra 10%. I'm saving for a Nimbus 2001, George bargained, and the three of them bickered lightheartedly as they left. That night, The castle's basement corridors were hushed, torches crackling softly and sending smoked sparks into their holders. Loren's footsteps were careful as he reached the potions classroom door. He knocked twice. Snape's voice sounded muffled through the wood. "Come in." Loren opened the door. Snape's office beyond the classroom was empty, but down in the potions lab, Professor Snape stood at a workbench, bent over his cauldron. The air carried a nauseating, rotten egg tang with something else layered underneath. Loren inhaled sharply. "Wolfsbane potion?" he blurted. Snape's eyes flicked at him with a flash of approval before cooling. "If you couldn't have named it, I'd have made you drink the whole pot." The smell made Loren shiver. He shook his head. "You can't forget something like this." He sniffed again, puzzled. There was another note in the brew, an arum lily reek that didn't belong. He asked, "Besides the aconite smell, I get arum lily. Has the recipe been altered?" Snape's expression softened, a rare approval at the question. Belby at the Ministry revised the formula. He added giant arum lily. The new wolfsbane's effects run for a shorter time but are gentler on the body. It reduces the agony for the werewolf taking it. "So to get the same effect, you'd need a larger dose?" Loren peered into the dark, simmering potion. Reduced pain, gentler action, but a bigger dose. That seemed contradictory. Snape didn't directly answer the dosage question. He stirred the potion clockwise with a long spoon and said, "Aconite is the main ingredient, an extraordinarily potent poison. One of its mechanisms is to induce severe pain, targeting certain brain regions and aspects of the soul, if you like, to rouse reason and suppress the beast within a werewolf." After consulting Belby, I hypothesized that the more intense the pain the potion causes, the clearer and longer lasting the effect, Snape went on. "If that's true, weakening the pain would reduce the duration or efficacy." He handed Loren a list on a scrap of parchment. "See if you can add these ingredients to the formula without destroying the wolfsbane potion's basic properties. You don't need to work out precise dosages, just propose an improved recipe each week." Loren was intrigued by Snape's unconventional method of teaching. He took the parchment and scanned the names. Rafflesia, the giant, fleshy, parasitic plant famous for its foul-smelling blooms, the carrion flower, African starfish flower, and of course, giant arum lily. Loren wiped an imaginary bead of sweat from his brow. It felt as if Snape's aim wasn't merely instruction or refinement of a potion. "Does it have to be these?" Loren asked. "If you know of anything more effective, add it," Snape replied easily. "Also, notify the Potions Club. I want everyone in the classroom tomorrow afternoon." "Understood, Professor." When the bell for the Potions Club rang, Snape entered the dim underground classroom just as it finished and stood squarely on the podium. The room was quiet. Only a handful of students had come, scattered across the benches and making the space seem surprisingly large. Since the mass production of the Elixir of Euphoria had ended, the club's activities had been smaller in scope. Snape had never officially taught them before. Today's meeting felt sudden, and the members whispered among themselves, unsure what the professor intended to reveal. The classroom was vast and dim. Professor Snape's heavy gaze swept steadily across the students, pausing only briefly when it passed over Harry. Loren sat on the right side of the room with Hermione at his side. Harry was seated behind them. Most of the Gryffindor members of the Potions Club clustered in that area. A scrap of parchment from the previous night was tucked into Loren's open textbook, and a few tentative ideas were sketched to the right of an African egret flower. He had been jotting down bitter-sounding ingredients, and more carefully, ways to make the wolfsbane potion more palatable without diminishing its potency. Loren set down his quill, and for a moment, cleared his head of the myriad potion processes that filled it. He found himself thinking back to the potions office last night. Since the Easter holiday ended and Sirius had left Hogwarts, it had been the first time he'd been alone with Snape. The professor hadn't said a word about Sirius's departure. Had Snape not known about the animosity between him and Sirius? Loren doubted it. Given Snape's attitude toward Black, he would surely have noticed the sudden absence and queried Dumbledore. And Dumbledore, by habit, would have informed Professor Snape of the reason, and perhaps told him to keep an eye on Loren's state of mind. Yet Snape had ignored the whole matter. Loren suspected the rather absurd task of improving the wolfsbane potion had been a deliberate diversion, an odd kind of consolation. It made him feel oddly cared for. Snape completed his round of inspection. After confirming attendance, he said, "Does anyone know Damocles Belby?" There was a ripple of recognition. Damocles Belby had just been awarded the Order of Merlin, second class, for his wolfsbane potion. His investiture and medal had filled the center pages of the Daily Prophet a few days earlier. He'd become the most talked-about figure since Lockhart. Werewolf illness, with its widespread, stealthy concealment and difficulty in stemming infection, had made the wolfsbane potion a breakthrough that set off ripples across wizarding communities worldwide. In the United States, where past waves of immigration had concentrated werewolf populations into troublesome, exposed communities, the potion had been especially sensational. Belby had been invited to teach and lecture at Ilvermorny, Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, and many other institutions. Hermione remembered the enlarged photo in the Prophet, Belby with his medal, flanked by foreign dignitaries. Representatives from the American Magical Congress, the German Ministry of Magic, the French Ministry of Magic had attended. The British Ministry had sent Barty Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation. Belby was British, and the investiture had been held here. By tradition, the Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, should have conferred the honor. But Fudge had been absent, so had Senior Undersecretary Umbridge. Crouch's presence looked more like diplomatic business than congratulations. Coupled with recent anti-werewolf legislation, the ministry's stance felt oddly ambiguous. What would that mean for Britain's werewolves? Hermione's mind churned with uneasy questions she couldn't answer. Most of the advanced potions students raised their hands. They kept close watch on the field and its luminaries. Harry hesitated, staring at them, bewilderment on his face. Snape glanced at him without expression and continued. Belby graduated from Hogwarts. Afterward, he devoted himself to improving classical potion formulas. In the mid-1970s, some 20 years ago, he found a damaged history volume describing an ancient Egyptian ritual used to tame werewolves. Inspired by that ritual, he set out to develop the wolfsbane potion. Loren's expression grew thoughtful. Snape had once said that potions and charms were both forms of ritual magic, expressed differently. Belby's work, building a recipe from a ritual, seemed to prove it. Snape's voice dropped, slow and measured. The formula for the wolfsbane potion was not perfected until this year. Many pursue potions for honor, for prestige, for wealth, even for power. Belby is what many of you dream of becoming. But know this, besides Belby, there are countless potion makers no one will ever notice. A long, repetitive life often erodes ambition, and most will end up only scraping by. Loren thought Snape was overly grim. A craft like potion making wouldn't leave a witch or wizard destitute. Still, the class fell quiet. Some had recently learned the hard reality, after the mass production of rue extract, of how grueling the work could be. Those who had suffered setbacks but refused to give up their ambitions listened without looking troubled. Snape scanned the room. Several older students who had privately asked him for recommendation letters sat attentive. He pursed his lips. There is procurement of raw materials, production and R&D, preservation and distribution. If, after understanding the hardships, you still wish to pursue a career in any of these areas, register with Professor McGonagall. She will arrange some internship placements for the summer. Eyes widened at that. Before the chatter could begin, Snape cut them off. Now, officially, class. Today we will discuss the influence of lunar phases on potion properties. As Snape lectured, Loren thought back to the Christmas holiday, when Snape had mentioned working with the Basilisk's corpse. The school's potion program was expanding, and McGonagall needed recruits. Internships were probably just a way to supply cheap labor, he guessed. Dinner in the Great Hall was lively. Snape sat on the right side of the high table, and as they ate, said to McGonagall, "The matter has been announced. People should be registering with you very soon." "Understood," she replied. "I'll arrange the candidates as soon as possible." "Oh," Flitwick chimed in, blowing on his beard as he praised the borscht. "I never expected the business to expand this quickly. A year ago, we were petitioning the Board of Governors for more funding for Pomona's rare seeds." Sprout set down her knife and fork. "Actually, I'm happy to provide the seeds for teaching free of charge. It was Minerva who insisted the school buy them from me at market price. McGonagall offered a faint smile. That's proper. I have a plan. When the school is capable of running independently, we'll pay staff proportionally and allocate some funds for the students. Splendid, Flitwick said, his imagination running. They won't have to use second-hand manuals anymore. And the broomsticks can be replaced. And those broken cauldrons. For years, board restrictions had constrained the school. Many teaching implements were older than some of the professors. The cleansweep brooms in flying were antiques, and some suppliers had stopped selling that model. If the school couldn't make do, they might pile the old brooms in a storeroom or use them for sweeping. McGonagall had already planned to buy a batch of affordable new brooms over the holidays to retire the worst of the lot. Dumbledore sat at the head of the table and, when the subject of accounts came up, mused. If the earlier accounts hadn't been miscalculated, this process might move faster. McGonagall's smile faltered. She glanced at Dumbledore's white beard and said, "The most urgent matter is the defense against the dark arts post. We need a real professor for the position." Dumbledore thought a moment, realizing he'd been indiscreet. Expanding too quickly can hide problems. A measured pause may be wise. He stroked his beard. As for the defense professor, don't worry, Minerva. I have a candidate who could start after the summer. I hope he can stay through Christmas, McGonagall replied after a beat. And as for Easter, she trailed off, then raised her glass. Let's decide after Christmas. Flitwick and Sprout lowered their heads to eat, but couldn't help letting out delighted laughter. At the Gryffindor table, Loren was absorbed in a braised veal shank. The meat was tender, the tendons chewy in the right way, and the rich gravy was almost intoxicating. But he had to be careful. He had a mandrake leaf tucked in his mouth. If he bit through it or let the sharp bones and gristle nick it, the leaf could be ruined. He'd had a premonition he might lose the duel against this delicious shank, but he'd gone for it anyway. What could be more important than good food? After finishing the first shank, he pressed the leaf with his tongue against the roof of his mouth to check it. It was intact, no shred marks, no bitter sap. He relaxed and picked up another shank. Before long, a crunch and then a new flavor spread across his tongue, fresh, slightly sour, with a touch of astringency and a faint sweetness. He'd crushed the mandrake leaf. Loren paused and smacked his lips, surprised. The flavor wasn't unpleasant. The sharp green taste actually cut the richness of the meat and made the whole bite more satisfying. Is it good? Hermione asked at his side. He nodded. It's good. The texture is great. Very chewy. I meant the mandrake, she said. Loren chuckled. Heh, you caught me. He had been visibly savoring it, and anyone could tell. Hermione reached for the last veal shank on his plate, took a small bite, and then stopped. Don't. Loren reached to stop her, and then realized something else. Hermione's diet seemed normal today. Where she'd usually had mushy oatmeal and boiled fruit, she'd been eating steak, sausages, even crusty croissants. She lowered her head and chewed slowly on the chewy veal shank. I bit it when I was brushing my teeth this morning, she said quietly. I spat it out then. Loren raised an eyebrow. You didn't say? I didn't even notice. Aren't you disappointed? No. Hermione seemed genuinely pleased with the food. I haven't mastered the principle of animagus transformation yet, or the method of suppressing the animal instinct with reason. That ritual was bound to fail. I told you so, Loren muttered with a grin. I said it from the start, but you didn't believe me. You didn't tell me you failed earlier. If I had, Hermione cut in softly, you would have spat the leaf out on the first day because it annoyed you. If I'd said I failed, you'd have thrown the mandrake away. I wanted to see how long you could last. She smiled a little. Turns out you didn't make it. It's not my fault. I was fine after the first shank. Must have been the second one's doing, Loren protested, though he still chewed happily. Hermione ignored him, serene, savoring the meal in front of her. 255. Only Neville. A month had passed in the blink of an eye. It was May. Summer was reaching out into the castle grounds and the forbidden forest. Bluebells carpeted the earth in wide swathes of soft purple, swaying in gentle waves as if they had been put there to make people stop and look. It was asparagus season, and Hagrid had sent Hedwig that morning with an invitation. Come to the hut and try fresh asparagus. Harry, Ron, Loren and Hermione had just come from Transfiguration and ran straight for the cabin at the edge of the forest. Fang, Ginny, and Luna were already waiting on the path. The first years had had herbology and come straight after. Hagrid was at the door, trimming asparagus. "Harry," he boomed, "you're here at last," Hagrid said when they reached him. "Ginny and Luna have been waiting forever. Come and see. Unicorns go mad for this stuff." Unicorns. A few of them drew closer, curious. Hagrid peeled away the fibrous root ends to toss to his beasts and set aside the tender tips and middle stalks for them. Loren broke one in two with his fingers. The asparagus snapped cleanly, bright green and perfectly fresh. "I was going to stew lamb," Hagrid admitted, "but you told me in your note not to hurry. The fresh leg's still over there if you want it." "The weather's too good for soup," Loren said, although he didn't bother to finish the sentence aloud. Hagrid's soups were serviceable, but ordinary. Hermione had been on a liquid diet for a week and was so bored she would have chewed on oxtail if she could. Loren had set up a small grill in the yard to make something different, grilled lamb with asparagus and a perch soup, and Hermione had followed to help. Harry and Ron helped Hagrid prepare the vegetables. Ginny and Luna wanted to pitch in, but were politely shooed away for being too small. They pulled up little stools and watched with shining eyes. Luna peered at Harry as he lifted the asparagus from the water. "Do you think you can beat Slytherin in the next Quidditch match?" she asked. "We've been arguing about it in our common room." Ravenclaw had recently lost to Slytherin, and expectations were high that the greenhouse would trounce the losers again later on. Harry had seen the match but wasn't thinking about Quidditch then. He was thinking about other things. "Who is your seeker?" he asked instead. Ginny stiffened beside Luna. She had a quick, careful look at Harry and felt something unfamiliar stir. Luna blinked, then smiled a little. "Cho Chang," she said. "She's very good, very popular. She defended me last night when I was arguing with Edgecombe about whether blibbering humdingers exist." "She defended you?" Ginny snapped. "She only stopped Edgecombe putting minor jinxes on you." "I thought she was very kind," Harry said hurriedly when he realized how sudden his question sounded. "I mean, her Quidditch is very good. She could block Malfoy's Nimbus." Ginny's face went red. She was suddenly small and prickly, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Luna, serene as ever, turned her head and said in the same level voice she always used, "Blibbering humdingers, Ginny, you're being bothered by them. They're buzzing around your ears." "I can feel them too," Ginny said, forcing a smile, and slipped off to whisper with Luna. Harry and Ron were left standing awkwardly. "Why are they acting so odd?" Harry asked, scratching his head. "Girls are like that," Ron said bluntly. "You get like that too sometimes. Ever since we watched the Ravenclaw-Slytherin match, you've been strange." Loren and Hermione, a little away from them, didn't hear that exchange. Around them, the mood was bright and easy. Asparagus boiled in clear water to bring out its natural flavor. The seasonal stalks were crisp and green, with a delicate sweetness and a hint of artichoke and green bean. Loren didn't much fancy plain boiled asparagus. He reserved some to grill with pieces of lamb and perch so everything would pick up the meat juices. "The Animagus class is at 3?" Loren asked. Hermione nodded. "DADA's canceled today. Only Animagus." "We'll make it," he said. "Lucky them. No classes this afternoon. They can play all day." "You can play too," Hermione reminded him. "Professor McGonagall said you may withdraw from the Animagus work at any time." "I won't," Loren muttered. Hermione couldn't help smiling. He was easier company than he pretended to be. There were things between them that went unspoken, small, warm attentions that made the world sharper and funnier when they were together. Loren cut the lamb into small pieces, marinated them, and arranged them on an iron pan. They grilled the meat until the fat began to ooze and sizzle, adding the asparagus later so it would soak up the juices. Hagrid boiled the rest for a simple salad. They used transfiguration to fashion utensils they lacked, and a charm to control the fire. Hagrid's hut was plain but rich in firewood, and flames licked the meat until the smell that rose from it made mouths water. Harry, Ron, and Hagrid hovered nearby while Fang trailed around Hagrid's legs, dribbling. "That's ready!" Ron burst out the moment the first piece was done. Loren turned away coolly. He said nothing, but his eyes told the rest. They ate ravenously. Ginny popped a piece of lamb into her mouth and felt absurdly that the blibbering humdingers had been chased from her head. What was Cho Chang beside her? She thought fiercely. Harry and Ron devoured theirs without regard for the heat, whimpering like Fang when a bite burned them. Hermione, more careful, blew on her meat until it was warm enough, took small bites and let the flavors spread slowly across her tongue. The crisp, charred skin, the juicy lamb infused with herbs, and the fresh snap of asparagus. It tasted like summer and something else, something familiar that conjured Loren in her mind. Whether the pleasure came from the food or the person who'd prepared it was hard to tell. After lunch, Harry and Ron sprawled on the cottage steps in the drowsy way of men whose stomachs are full. Hagrid took the remaining asparagus to feed the Thestrals. Luna, hearing talk of a baby unicorn, dragged Ginny off into the trees, humming to herself. She came back a short while later with a haphazard crown of wildflowers looped around her neck, bright splashes of red, yellow, and blue woven into a loose circle. "I knew they'd like it," she said, delighted. "The Thestrals and the ponies fought over them to wear. I hope the little unicorn will like it. It's always hiding and runs off if I get too close." "Try hanging it on a low branch and stepping back," Loren suggested. "If the unicorn likes it, it might take it itself." "Good idea," Luna cried, already running off again, her soft humming following her as she went. Hermione admired how, no matter what others said about Luna, animals trusted her in a way they seemed not to trust people. Loren picked up a story again. He had been inventing names and dramas for the tiny creatures around a small pumpkin patch. 2 slugs called Cassidin and Kha'Zix squaring off against an ant colony whose leader he named Darius, and a smaller sibling called Draven. Hermione listened, amused and interested. There was a whole, coherent, private world in Loren's head, and the unimportant bits of the day took on their own meaning when he described them. Ordinary things became stories simply for being seen with the right person. They didn't realize how late it had gotten until a glance at the clock. Past 2 in the afternoon, Hermione cursed and pulled Loren toward the castle. They were not late when they reached the Transfiguration classroom. In fact, they were early. Neville sat in the front row already, head bent over the catalog they'd been given last time. Cedric and the Weasley siblings clustered together, Percy clutching Fred by the collar, Cedric holding George in a similar grip, and they all looked like they might dismantle each other any minute. "I never let Professor down," Percy was saying, shaking Fred. "It's your fault, both of you." "It was Peeves," George said. He sounded lightheaded. "Really, it wasn't us. Percy, your mandrake leaf was found chewed. You must be grinding your teeth," Fred said, and Percy went red with fury. The twins exchanged a grin and, in a moment of truce, pulled Percy and Cedric close enough to wrap their arms around them. The rest of the class crowded in, exchanging jokes and playful pokes until Professor McGonagall swept into the room clutching a picture book. Rita, wearing a small mask for reasons nobody quite explained, came in behind her. "Who managed to keep a mandrake leaf in their mouth for a month?" Professor McGonagall asked, and the classroom exploded. "It was George and Fred's fault. They were making faces. I dropped mine because they frightened me." The shouts rose and tumbled over each other, everyone blaming the twins. In the din, Neville looked up, startled and then tentative. He raised his hand slowly. The room quieted as if someone had closed a book. Conversations halted, eyes swung toward him, and every face registered the same mixture of astonishment and disbelief. Most of the younger students in the class stared at Neville in stunned silence. He had actually done it. Those who had tasted failure understood how difficult it had been. With a fragile mandrake leaf tucked in his mouth, he had to be careful at every moment. An accidental sneeze, a misplaced emphasis in speech, or a careless bite while eating could ruin everything. Many of the Animagus class blamed the Weasley twins for their own failures, but deep down, they knew the fault lay with themselves. In the latter stages of the ritual, some had thought they understood Professor McGonagall's intent. A few had felt secretly relieved when their mandrake leaf was damaged, an excuse to give up. When several good students, Cedric among them, announced their failure, the rest relaxed even more. And now the chubby boy, who had quietly persevered, had managed to succeed, shocking everyone. Professor McGonagall regarded Neville with an approving look. "A month ago, I did not expect any of you to manage this," she said. "Many notable Transfiguration scholars have been stopped by the wall of the Mandrake. Mr. Longbottom, you have an astonishingly strong will." Neville's eyes shone at the compliment. He flushed and nearly buried his face in his arms, then forced himself to look up. "Professor, may I continue the rest of the ritual?" Neville had heard the rumor that the ritual was impossible to complete. The underlying principles of Transfiguration had not been fully taught. The balance between reason and instinct had gone unmentioned. The cleverer students' arguments had sounded convincing, but Professor McGonagall had only told them to begin and had said nothing else. Between following the clever students' elaborate plans and simply obeying the professor, Neville had chosen the slow, cautious route. If talking threatened the leaf, he would speak as little as possible. If eating could damage it, he would eat less. If sleeping might cause him to swallow it, he would sleep less. He could not conjure clever strategies, so he used clumsy patience, and that patience had paid off. "Of course," McGonagall smiled. "Tonight is the full moon. Come to my office after dinner. We will need time to prepare the secret potion and then find a quiet place away from the sun to hide it." A ripple of excitement went through the room. "Wow!" George and Fred cried at once. Others muttered between themselves, equal parts envy and condemnation of the twins. "Peeves, I must teach that fellow a lesson." Cedric, usually gentle, ground his teeth as he said it. He had been so close. Hermione's mouth tightened. She had already consoled herself after her mandrake leaf had been damaged, but now, hearing Neville was going on, she could not hide her disappointment. "Amazing. Neville!" Loren grinned and bumped his shoulder with the boy in the front row. Neville's face flushed with awkwardness. Unused to the attention, he could only manage a small smile, nod vigorously at McGonagall, and sit down. "When will this month's mandrake be issued again?" someone called. "I won't fail next time. I'll stay far away from George and Fred." "I'm afraid not," McGonagall said gently. "Final exams are near, and after them comes the summer holiday. Even if you manage to hold on for a month, there won't be time to complete the ritual." A chorus of groans filled the classroom. "Oh no! It's all George and Fred's fault. Shut up, Andrew. We know you swallowed the mandrake leaf while eating your bread." McGonagall listened with a smile as the students shouted. She knew Neville's success would encourage more to try again next term. "Although this term is nearly over, you can keep practicing holding a mandrake leaf to gain experience," she said. "And for those of you graduating," a seventh-year student's hand shot up. "Professor, what about us?" It had slipped many minds that the Animagus class was not grouped by year. For a beat, the room fell quiet. "There will be opportunities," McGonagall continued softly. "Graduating from school does not mean the end of learning. You may write to me. Not just Transfiguration, charms, potions, care of magical creatures. I do not believe any of the professors would refuse correspondence. Becoming an animagus is not a necessary art and carries dangers. I would not encourage you to attempt the ritual alone. When you are sure you have mastered the theory, you may return and try again, and should you do so, you must bring your own mandrake." That last remark drew a ripple of laughter. For the remainder of the hour, McGonagall spoke of methods for studying Transfiguration and recommended journals, books, and articles, a careful lesson on how to continue study after leaving school. The atmosphere was quieter than usual. After class, McGonagall left first. Through conversation with the graduating students, Loren learned this was not an isolated case. In recent weeks, many teachers had stepped back from detailed instruction and focused on general methods, preparing the older students for independent study. Hermione packed away her atlas and walked out with Loren, discussing revision plans as they went. Final exams were usually the first week of June, results the second, then the summer holiday after the farewell feast. This year, the defense against the dark arts exam had been canceled and other second-year subjects had been simplified, so Hermione had not begun revising months in advance. That evening, in the boys' dormitory, just as Loren and his 3 housemates were about to fall asleep, Neville slipped inside and closed the door gently behind him. The old wooden door creaked. 4 pairs of eyes swung toward it. Neville's chubby frame trembled. "I didn't mean to be noisy," I tried to be as quiet as I could. No one cares about the door. The house elves will check it during the holidays, Loren said with a wave. Tell us about the ritual. What did Professor McGonagall have you do? Harry, Ron, and Seamus leaned forward. Neville answered slowly. We put a bit of mandrake and some of my saliva into a crystal vial, then added a hair and a teaspoon of dew that Professor Snape provided, and a death's head hawkmoth chrysalis. Then we have to find a quiet, dark place to hide it. The others knew the steps already, but listened eagerly anyway. Harry looked out toward the night. It doesn't sound complicated. Why did it take so long? Neville's face reddened, and he scratched his head. I forgot the password and got locked out by the fat lady. I only managed to get in with George and Fred. They were out after curfew. What? Ron exploded. George and Fred out after curfew again. I'll report them. Loren burst the bubble immediately. Think carefully. The holidays are coming. You'll have 2 months for them to get back at you. Do you think I'm scared of them? Ron retorted, only half believing his own bravado. Harry yawned and said quietly, Yes. Loren, Harry, which side are you on? Ron demanded, and the dorm filled with laughter. Neville changed into his pajamas and flopped onto his bed. He stared through the dark curtains to the moonlit sky beyond, and his thoughts wandered to the closed ward of St. Mungo's. Would his mother and father be proud? They should be. Saturday arrived, the day of the final between Gryffindor and Slytherin. The morning air was full of noise as students streamed from the Great Hall toward the Quidditch pitch. Under thunderous cheering, players from both houses rose into the air. Luna, banner in hand, organized the less enthusiastic Gryffindors, urging Hermione and others with notebooks to shout. For a moment, it was hard to tell Gryffindor from Ravenclaw in the stands. On the pitch, the match was tense. Gryffindor's Hawkhead offensive formation did not have the desired effect. Angelina charged, but Slytherin players met her more aggressively than before and forced her to turn back. Slytherin's play was ruthless. Gryffindor's defense struggled. Wood moved and dove fast in front of the hoops, but the score kept widening. The game hinged on Harry. To Harry's surprise, Draco seemed to be engaging him in a straightforward seeker's duel rather than taunting him constantly. Dragging, feints, psychological ploys, Draco wasn't bothering with the usual barbs. Harry found himself enjoying the skirmish. He was stronger than Draco in the air, and by leading him on, he helped disrupt Slytherin's rhythm. After a double-8 loop that aided Gryffindor in regaining the quaffle, Wood flew up to Harry with a serious look. Harry, if we drag this out any longer, we'll lose, Wood warned. Harry checked the scoreboard, 30 to 100. The gap was nearing 150. Flying beside the scoreboard, Draco wore a sinister smile. Harry's stomach tightened. Was Draco holding back on purpose? Ginny, watching in the stands, noticed Harry's expression. We've got the quaffle. Why does Harry look unhappy? She asked. Ron didn't answer. He was leaning on the railing, almost wobbling out of the stands, ready to fly up and thump Slytherin's captain off his broom. Loren hauled him back and whispered, Draco's letting Harry chase the snitch. Once the difference is over 150, we lose regardless. Hermione had closed her notebook. She was muttering calculations about the house cup. Luna shook her banner and said in her usual airy voice, Harry will win. Got it, Captain, Harry murmured and refocused. He gripped his broom and sped up, scanning the sky. The Seekers pushed their Nimbus 2001s to full speed, 2 streaking shadows weaving above the pitch. On the main field, chasers and beaters fought like a boiling potion. Slytherin played brutally. Gryffindor worked together with clever blocks and interceptions. No one used wands while Madame Hooch was watching, but the gap in equipment and strength kept favoring Slytherin, and the score climbed toward disaster. As he swept past the edge of the pitch, a flash of gold caught Harry's eye. Without thinking, he pushed the broom harder and shot after it. He caught the golden snitch, and momentum carried him into a flag at the pitch's edge. The fabric slowed him enough for a smooth landing. He raised his hand, and the snitch flashed in his palm. For a heartbeat, the stands were stunned, then the cheers exploded. Long live Gryffindor! Long live Harry Potter! Gryffindor had won the Quidditch Cup. The House Cup was all but decided. Professor McGonagall suppressed a smile. It seems broomsticks are only tools. The players make the difference, she said calmly. Winning or losing matters less than what the students gain, Snape added flatly. Draco learned a great deal tonight. Next year we should consider switching to the firebolt. It's faster. McGonagall was silent for a moment. Professor Sprout laughed. I'll look into it. If it's suitable, I'll try to get some for the team. Professor Flitwick stroked his beard anxiously. I agree. Players matter most, but we should standardize the brooms. We mustn't get caught in a pointless arms race. Snape and Sprout might have the funds for such a move. Flitwick, as Charm's professor, grinned helplessly at the thought. If they did switch to firebolts, Ravenclaw could truly be left behind. For these classes, I want you to dig up the pulsating toadstools in that corner and replant them in the fenced beds, Professor Sprout called from the greenhouse doorway. The holidays are coming, and if we leave them unchecked all summer, they'll be choking the place when we reopen. And stay away from those mandrakes. Stop stealing their leaves. If you provoke them, they'll jump and bite. Loren glanced at Hermione. The little witch's brown hair swung when he nudged her. She pouted in plain displeasure. Stealing mandrake leaves had been the doing of a few animagus students trying to gather material to practice over the break, and they'd gone too far. Several young mandrakes had been stripped bare, which was why Sprout was having to make a point of it. So, can we take some toadstools home? Someone called. Are mandrakes going to chase us? Another asked, and the Gryffindors laughed. They had been more boisterous than usual since winning the House Cup. Only a recent punishment from Snape, collecting toad saliva, had dampened them a little. Some of those toadstools are poisonous, Sprout warned. If you don't fancy spending the holidays at St. Mungo's, don't take off your gloves. Anyone who dares the mandrakes again, and I'll dig a pit and bury him next to them. She laughed irritably. Now get to work. Buckets were grabbed, gloves pulled on. The students fanned out across the loamy beds. Gardening boots made soft sucking noises on the damp floor. Loren shook Hermione's shoulder. He could smell the clean, young scent about her. Come on, you really aren't going to hold a mandrake in your mouth over the holidays, are you? I'm just not willing to let it go, Hermione muttered, sulky. It's just practice. Anything'll do in your mouth. She sounded gloomy. I'll make you a light bulb candy when we get home, Loren said, grinning as he pushed them along the rows. You can hold that for as long as you like. What's a light bulb candy? She asked. Summer settled over the grounds in a hush. The sky over the Black Lake took on a pale blue with a faint purple gleam, and in the greenhouse flowers bloomed as big as cabbages. Harry, working beneath a venomous tentacula climbing frame, plucked up a striking toadstool. Its cap had black stripes and the stem showed 2 dark mold spots. Black hair, black eyes, he said foolishly, grinning. You're just like Cho Chang. Loren's got black hair and black eyes too. Ron snapped, swatting a spiky crimson plant that had been reaching a curious tendril toward Harry's shoulder. The tentacula retracted obediently. Watch them. Those venomous tentacula have grown fangs. If one drags you into the frame, you won't be taking your finals. Harry's face flushed scarlet. He stuffed the toadstool into his bucket quicker than necessary. Ron squinted at him. You haven't actually fallen for her, have you? I don't know, Harry stammered. I keep thinking about her. Not the time for romance, mate, Ron said. Finals are the main thing. That night, Harry dreamed badly. He and many others were crowded in a dark room. Eyes glowed a faint green. Clothes were ragged. At the front stood a man with patches on his cloak. He was the chosen leader of the werewolves in that shadowy place. From an armchair hidden in darkness came a cold, hoarse voice. Its speaker's face could not be seen. Wormtail sat beside it, trembling under the many angry stares of the werewolves. The next International Confederation of Wizards meeting is coming, the patched leader said. The British Ministry's anti-werewolf legislation will be spread to the Confederation. Only by supporting me can I bring you dignity and freedom. You think you can bargain? The cold voice sneered. You are dogs chased by the American Congress. What can you possibly trade with me? The room thrummed with silent rage. Wormtail shook as the leader refused the terms and left with the werewolves. Wormtail breathed a small, high voice from the shadowed armchair. My master, why trouble with such lowly things? They are of no use in a foreign land. Think long-term, Wormtail, the voice replied. In a few months you will return to Hogwarts. I will need other servants." Harry woke with a start. His head felt heavy. Sleep had fled him. Outside the window, the sun was edging up behind the clouds. A soft chanting came from down the corridor. Neville, repeating the animagus ritual he'd promised to perform at sunrise and sunset while tending to the secret potion. Amado, animo, animado, animagus. Exhausted, Harry burrowed back under the covers for another few minutes' doze, trying to chase the shadow of Voldemort from his mind. Later, in Transfiguration, the ancient classroom's stone walls and high ceiling made everything feel small. Candles flickered along the walls. A few ghosts hung at the back, skimming through translucent papers and sometimes chilling a dozing student with a friendly, frosty hand, much to Professor McGonagall's displeasure and point deductions. Loren and Hermione sat near the window, daydreaming toward Hagrid's figure striding by the lake with a bunch of curious yellow flowers, fangs circling his boots. McGonagall reviewed the semester's work in her crisp, no-nonsense way. Loren found the simplified second-year Transfiguration dull and tempted to close his eyes. Hermione's sharp pinch kept him honest. Harry in the front row looked worse than exhausted. His head drooped. He jolted awake. McGonagall's eyes flicked their way more than once. When the bell rang, McGonagall closed her book. "The final exam will cover what we've reviewed. The date is June 1st. Study, consult each other, or come to me with questions. Those of you who want more may study the elective sections." Students hurried to gather their notes. Harry, suddenly alert, stuffed books into his bag and beckoned, "Let's go to the empty classroom next door. I need to tell you something." A few minutes later, in a deserted classroom, Harry told them of the dream. "Voldemort's recruiting werewolves," he said. "They were planning something. Wormtail's supposed to be coming back to school next semester." Ron balled his fists. "Coming back to school? Voldemort sending Wormtail back? I'd like to have a go at him." Hermione's face was grave. "The anti-werewolf legislation might be pushed internationally," she said. "We have to tell Headmaster Dumbledore." "That's what I thought too," Harry said. Loren listened, turning the information over. Voldemort rallying dark creatures, werewolves, giants, acromantulas, sounded like the beginnings of the old pattern, armies of monsters used as cannon fodder. But that was something for older heads to worry about. Loren folded his arms and asked Harry, "Is your occlumency getting any better?" Harry's silence and shake of the head said everything. Ron suggested Professor Snape might help. He knew the danger of Harry's mind touching Voldemort's. Loren, after a moment, said, "Compared to Voldemort, I suppose Snape isn't going to kill you if he makes you uncomfortable." Hermione shoved his shoulder. "Do you have to be so blunt?" McGonagall's classroom emptied, and the four of them went at once to the headmaster's office. Dumbledore, beard white as always, was reading the Daily Prophet. He listened, frowning, as they told him about Harry's dream and the hints of American werewolves. "From your description, they sound American," he murmured, then sat up straighter and fixed them with a calm look. "I will deal with this, Harry. For now, your first priority must be to master occlumency." A thought Harry dared not voice hovered at the edge of his mind. If he could see what Voldemort was planning, mightn't it help to know? The temptation to keep the connection because it gave useful information showed on his face, and Loren, without any magic, read it. "Think of it this way," Loren said lightly, watching Harry go pale. "What if Voldemort dreamed you missing Cho Chang?" "No!" Harry yelped before he could think. The idea made him crimson with embarrassment. Hermione laughed, leaning against Loren's shoulder, and Ron grinned like a boy with a secret. Dumbledore's hand went to his beard. He seemed amused. "Harry," Dumbledore said, with a twinkle that tempered his seriousness, "I must advise you." The twinkle disappeared. He switched back to the gravity of the situation. "Lord Voldemort might peer into the contents of your mind. That means I cannot tell you my plans now. For the moment, focus on your exams. These old bones will do what they can. You needn't have the children take on the Dark Lord." His calm assurance settled them. Hermione, unable to keep her concern at bay, asked the question on her mind. "Headmaster, do you think the anti-werewolf legislation will be promoted at the International Confederation? Will it become international law?" Dumbledore's smile faded, and he met her seriously, as one adult to another. "Hermione, perhaps the trial at Easter left you thinking the ministry is incompetent, but the International Confederation of Wizards was created for a better, more peaceful, magical world. President Pierre Bonnecord guards the rights of trolls, and President Elfrida Clegg welcomes Diracalls to meetings. The Confederation has sometimes erred on the side of leniency, but it has never sought to exclude an entire species. I, as a former president of the Confederation, will not consent to promoting an anti-werewolf law, even if they were to try to remove me from committees. He gave them a small, crooked smile. Besides, I have werewolf friends. After tea and a brief chat, they rose to go. As they reached the door, Dumbledore called after them. "Loren, could you accompany me to St. Mungo's after the holidays? I've settled a matter there." Loren waved, already moving off. "All right," he said without looking back. 258, end of second year. Hermione slowed her pace deliberately, letting Harry and Ron run on, while she and Loren fell in step behind them. "So you can't take the Hogwarts Express home with me again?" she teased, bumping him gently with her arm. "I blame Headmaster Dumbledore," Loren said, mock righteous. "It's a good thing Professor Flitwick asked me to stay over for a day or two to finish my apparition assessment." Hermione snorted twice, eyes bright. "St. Mungo's? Another secret I'm not allowed to know about?" "It's all right to talk about. It's for Neville's parents. Remember Bloody Mary's hand mirror? Maybe it can help." They watched the two boys ahead of them. Ron had clearly said something to Needle Harry, who'd covered his mouth and thrown himself at Ron. The pair were wrestling up the corridor. Thinking of the Longbottom's fate sobered Hermione. Her playful expression gave way to a sad sigh. If the Longbottoms can recover, Neville will be so happy. Maybe Neville could be less burdened, run and play with the others, just like the two who were already getting farther ahead. Late May made summer smell stronger. Bluebells clustered in richer purples and gleamed under the sun. Loren hadn't told Neville about the treatment. He didn't want to give anyone false hope. Neville still raised his wand to his chest and muttered charms at sunrise and sunset every day, but he never heard that second heartbeat. As the term wound down, Harry and Ron became surprisingly studious too, bringing history of magic texts to games of wizard's chess. Hermione grew secretive again, often running to the edge of the forbidden forest and returning with the scent of essence of murtlap clinging to her. Loren suspected what she was doing, but didn't press her. For the last 2 weeks, he'd refined his plan to add rafflesia and leopard skin flower extracts to the wolfsbane potion. Snape had said in theory it could work. The concentrated floral extracts required a month of fermentation, so real tests would have to wait. Loren didn't feel like revising and drifted, reading newspapers, stories, and joke books to fill the time. 3 days remained until their first exam. Over breakfast, Professor McGonagall stood and announced news that made the Great Hall erupt. "I have good news for everyone," she said. The hall grew louder, not quieter. "Final exams are canceled," George and Fred whooped. "The feast is tonight and the holidays start tomorrow," a boy at the Hufflepuff table yelled. When the din finally died down, McGonagall continued. "Professor Sprout tells me the mandrakes are finally ready to be harvested. Tonight, we will be able to wake those who were petrified. I therefore declare this dreadful year will end on a satisfactory note." Cheers filled the hall. Fear of exams was entirely eclipsed. Loren, idly holding a dinner knife, asked, "Do you think they'll have to take the finals if they wake up now?" Ron choked on his bacon, eyes wide. "You're cruel, Loren." Hermione smiled. Harry slapped the table. "Brilliant. Poor Colin's waking up. Merlin's beard. If he asks for 100 autograph photos, I'll sign them." "Autograph photos?" Snape, who had materialized beside them as usual, sneered. "The famous Potter is distributing autographs again. Shall I announce a queue?" Harry and Ron exchanged glances and went quiet. Loren felt the air thicken and laughed to relieve the tension. "Professor, is there something you'd like from us?" Snape's gaze slid to Loren. "Come to my office after breakfast. Preparing the mandrake draught will teach you something." "Yes, Professor." Loren nodded. Snape let out a small scoff. "Also, at 11 o'clock, the potion will be brought to the hospital wing. If certain people plan to hand out autographs, they might want to be ready." He flicked his cloak and left without another look. Ron watched him go and scratched his head. "Am I dreaming? Didn't she just suggest we go to the hospital wing to wait and see Colin wake up?" Or maybe she really wants my autograph photos, Harry muttered, optimistically taking a sip of milk. Hermione tilted her head. Are you coming to the hospital wing? I have other things this morning. Harry didn't hesitate. Colin got hurt coming to see me. If he wakes up and sees me first, he'll be thrilled. Oh no, Ron frowned. I'm not going. I'll go back to the common room and read. Maybe I'll pick up another mark on the exam. Harry looked pleading. What about you, Loren? Loren shook his head. You go on ahead. I'm not close to Colin. After I see the mandrake preparation, I'll head back to the common room. Harry's face fell. Looks like I'm the only one. After breakfast, Loren strolled to Snape's office and found Professor Sprout delivering the freshly dug mandrakes. They lay on the desk, roots trimmed, flecks of soil clinging to them. Good morning, Professor Snape, Professor Sprout, Loren greeted. Snape grunted. Sprout nodded and shivered as she looked about the dim office. I'll be off then, Severus. It's too cold down here. No daylight gets through. A dark, cold room helps preserve medicinal ingredients, Snape said without expression. Sprout muttered that she couldn't stand it and left. Once the door closed, both men seemed to breathe easier. Snape led Loren to a small storeroom in the office. The mandrake's power to cure petrification comes from its singular magic. This is not a complex potion recipe. We must preserve and unleash that magic to the fullest. The workbench was prepared with auxiliary materials, moonlit dew, last year's first snow, clear crystalline shards. Snape lit the furnace, melted crystal in the cauldron, and added the other substances with slow, precise movements. Many potions follow this line, simple, pure, but potent. The Bezoar antidote, the essence of Dittany, Loren murmured. Snape worked with an unhurried, almost artisan's care, as if he were crafting an object of beauty rather than brewing. The elixir of life follows a similar logic, he said suddenly. Bicorn horn, knotgrass, and the Philosopher's stone form a base. The rest of the ingredients enhance the replacement magic, thereby, he emphasized the word, conquering death. Loren pursed his lips and let Snape keep the illusion. Flamel had told him that, however right Snape's methods might be, no one could fully grasp death. The elixir was like a moon in water or a flower in a mirror. The mandrake draught took less than half an hour to brew. Afterward, Loren carried it to the hospital wing. A long line of people waited by the beds. Headmaster Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall were both there. Dumbledore stood solemnly, his expression unreadable. Madame Pomfrey prepared the draught, while McGonagall watched. Harry stood a little off to one side, surprised and pleased to see Loren. He winked and motioned for Loren to stay. Loren, however, had already greeted the professors and was about to leave. Loren, stay with me!" Harry hissed, voice strained, face screwed up in pleading. Loren frowned, looked around, and muttered, loud enough for Harry to hear. "Strange, I keep thinking someone's calling my name." Harry watched him walk away in despair. Had McGonagall not been smiling, he might have thought he'd been wearing an invisibility cloak. Later, in the Gryffindor common room, Harry flopped down dramatically. "Loren, you've abandoned our friendship." He made the sofa wobble, disturbing Loren, who was trying to read a joke book. "I can pick it up again," Loren said after a moment's thought. Harry plucked the book from his hands. "No more fooling around. No more." Loren laughed and set the book down. "How's it in the hospital wing? Do they still have to do finals?" "Of course not," Ron said, curious. "They were petrified too long. They'll be observed in the hospital wing for at least a week." Harry poured tea, animated. Colin woke up and immediately demanded his camera, claiming he took a photo of the monster. We spent ages explaining what happened. Then he started begging for an autograph photo. Justin wanted to apologize, said he shouldn't have suspected I was the heir of Slytherin. Harry finished his cup in one gulp. After that, Dumbledore said he'd take responsibility for Colin's and Justin's injuries and would visit their parents over the holidays about compensation. Ron frowned. "How is that Dumbledore's responsibility? He couldn't have known Voldemort was involved with Crabbe." Harry shrugged. "I don't know. It was all very odd." Loren listened quietly, opening his joke book again, but his gaze was distant, as if looking through the paper at something else entirely. June 1st came. Loren sat in transfiguration with his head down, answering questions in neat silver-inked script, neater than any homework he'd done all year. The transfiguration exam centered on the vanishing spell. The second-year curriculum had been trimmed, and exam questions reflected that, easier overall, testing how well students linked various points of knowledge. Other subjects were similar, except potions. With less material covered in class, Snape focused on minutiae in testing, formulas, brewing methods, preservation. Herbology's exam unsurprisingly concentrated on mandrakes, growth cycles, habits at each stage, and medicinal value after maturity accounted for more than half the paper. The second-year practicals posed little difficulty for Loren. Turning a rabbit into a slipper, creating a delicate frozen sculpture in a water tank with a freezing charm, he and the others earned full marks. The practical potions test was less about the draught than about withstanding Snape's cold gaze. As in past years, the last exam was History of Magic. When Professor Binns's ghost told them to put down their quills and roll up their parchments, the classroom cheered. The students poured out across the lawns and ran along the lakeshore. Within minutes, boys were splashing and battling the giant squid's tentacles, stirring up waves and shrieks from the girls. Hermione dragged Loren to a quieter spot and flopped down, breathing out a long, relieved sigh. "I was so worried I hadn't revised enough." Loren watched her for a moment before saying, "The questions were simple, except Professor Flitwick's. You had to use the general counterspell on the paper to see the other half of the questions." Hermione's smile froze. "Really? I didn't realize either." Loren feigned a self-satisfied sigh. "I thought it wouldn't be that simple. Someone's in trouble." "Loren Morgan." Hermione grabbed him, wrestling to pin him down. "Let go! Let go!" They tussled until Hermione lay back on the grass, hands under her head, laughing up at the trees. Loren found himself looking at her bare arm, pale, fine-boned, and wondered, quietly, why she seemed so much stronger than she looked. "What are you muttering about?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "Humph, I've told you not to tease me. I never agreed to that." They fell quiet as a cool breeze came off the Black Lake. The air had a hint of rain. Hermione closed her eyes. "Those clouds look heavy." "It'll rain," Loren said. 259. After the rain in early summer. Boom, clang! Thunder rolled as torrential rain battered the ancient outer walls of Hogwarts. Water streamed down the stone cracks. Heavy drops thudded against the leaves of the humping willow in a steady, noisy patter. Damp mist drifted through the castle corridors, bringing a cool breeze that stirred parchment pages in the common room. The Gryffindors refused to shut the windows. They wanted the storm to be heard. Voices rose above the rain in a chorus of shouting and laughter. Exploding snap! 3, missing 1, anyone in? Count me in! Where are my slippers? Who put my slippers away? Don't wear them, go barefoot! Checkmate! Wait, I regret that move. The common room was a riot of noise. Everyone stayed, joining in the uproar, their shouts almost trying to compete with the thunder. "Stick your hand out and get slapped," Loren called to Hermione, breathless with excitement. They were playing a childish game. One person put out a hand, the other attempted to slap it. If you got hit, you lost and had to keep getting slapped. If you pulled your hand back in time, you won, and the other person took the punishment. Only hits that crossed an imaginary midline counted. Feints and half-hearted taps were worthless. Hermione had just extended her hand when Loren slapped it down hard. "Ah!" she squealed, more annoyed than hurt. But the smile on her face refused to fade. They sat cross-legged, squeezed together on a single sofa, knees touching. The closeness let them feel each other's warmth. Hermione's shoulder-length hair was tousled, and she trembled with laughter, nothing like the composed Miss Know-It-All she usually was. "Keep getting hit," Loren urged. Hermione wiped tears of laughter from the corners of her eyes and slowly extended her hand again, expecting another ambush. At the last moment, she pulled it back. Loren's hand stayed where it was. Hermione had been tricked. She offered her hand once more, and Loren slammed it down. "Slap! You're impossible! Humph! You ambushed me again." She pretended to be wronged, but the laugh in her voice betrayed her. "Stop acting pitiful. Stick your hand out and take it," Loren demanded. She could have borne the sting of the slap, but the humiliation was worse. Hermione buried her face, put her hands behind her back, and mumbled, "You're too mean. I'm not playing with you anymore." Loren laughed. Even with her head buried, they were still face to face, so the protest was a losing effort. He pressed their foreheads together, reached for her hand, and she squirmed, tucking her arms under herself to resist. He pried them open. She hid her hands in the crook of her legs. Then the common room door burst open, and a drenched, bedraggled figure stumbled in, dripping onto the floor. Rainwater matted his hair to his scalp, and his clothes hung in wet folds. Neville's sodden appearance arrested the room. The uproar dimmed for a heartbeat. Hermione, startled, lost her balance and tumbled into Loren's arms. She sat up quickly, cheeks flushed, glanced around, and breathed easier when she saw no one had noticed the stumble. Members of the Animagus class, Percy at their head, clustered around Neville, unable to hide their curiosity. Did it work? Did it work? Neville, what did you become? Can you show us? It was a night they'd all been waiting for. Professor McGonagall had taken Neville to attempt the final steps of the Animagus ritual. The chances of success were slim, but hope lingered. Neville stepped back and stammered. It failed. Professor McGonagall said I need more experience. I'm going to change, Neville said and hurried up to the dormitories. The others exchanged sympathetic looks and let him be. When the clamor picked up again, Exploding Snap resumed its explosive rhythm. Hermione watched Neville go and asked softly, Neville will be all right, won't he? He'll be fine. Neville's stronger than most people, Loren said, and then, seizing the chance, slapped her hand again. Hermione, scowling, stood up and pinned him to the sofa. In his dormitory later, Neville changed and stared into the mirror. After a while, he began to pack for home. There was no point in dawdling. The Animagus attempt had been a bold try, like the many risky trials in his life. He had grown used to failure. It had been a steady companion for the last decade. Still, he was stubbornly resilient. The storm had gone through the night, and by morning left the sky clear. Loren woke to a calm, bright day. He pushed open his window barefoot. The air smelled clean and cool. He dressed and left the dormitory, bumping into Prefect Percy in the corridor. They walked out together, chatting. Have you signed up for Professor McGonagall's internship? Or are you going into the ministry after graduation? Not interested in potions? Loren asked. I signed up for a 2-week internship, Percy said. The rest of the holiday I'm going to Egypt with the family. He paused, then shifted tone into elder brother mode. You're going into your 3rd year soon. Use the holidays to review the basics you learned in the first 2 years. If you're thinking about being a prefect someday, start preparing now. Loren said, half listening as they descended the stairs. Percy then glanced down, a teasing smile forming. And make sure to confirm your relationship early. As you get busier in the later years, you'll think there's never enough time for dating. What? How did the conversation turn to that? Loren followed Percy's gaze. A familiar figure sat on a sofa below with a book in her hand. Hermione, looking up and smiling. She had swapped robes for home clothes, a dark green short-sleeved top with a rounded collar that made her wrist look delicate, and black wide-leg trousers. Vermilion in the light of morning, she looked lively and at ease. Quick, say good morning to me. Loren called as he walked down the last steps. Good morning. Hermione slipped the book back into the whale-shaped pendant at her throat. Good morning to you too, Loren. What are you doing today? Practice apparition again? Heading to the Forbidden Forest? Hermione's smile turned wicked. The holidays are nearly here. I need to catch up on apparition. Otherwise, I won't be able to apparate home to surprise you. She wasn't even pretending anymore. Loren's eyes widened. What is that supposed to mean? What kind of words are those? They strolled to the Great Hall for breakfast, chattering the way students do at the end of term. The hall was nearly empty. Only a handful of pupils sat scattered among the house tables. The deans and Dumbledore sat at the high table, occasionally nodding to passing students. Hermione finished her sandwich in a couple of bites and pushed a plate with 2 fried eggs toward Loren. Help yourself. Don't waste food. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin and left. 10 minutes later, Loren rose from the table and made his way out. He planned to go fishing in the Black Lake. The water level after the storm promised a good catch. Passing the courtyard, he stopped. The rain had made the plants greener and more alive. A shelled snail clung to another snail's back, advancing slowly over wet leaves. A single drop fell onto the nearer snail's shell, and both retracted in alarm, then peered out and continued. Loren crouched and watched, experimenting. He placed a leaf as an obstacle, nudged them toward a puddle, and found himself unexpectedly absorbed in the small spectacle. "The scenery looks even more vivid after the rain, doesn't it, Loren?" a familiar voice said. Dumbledore had appeared beside him, looking on with soft eyes. Loren sighed and looked up. "Headmaster, I have a grudge against Sirius Black, not you." Dumbledore smiled. "Even so, you speak as if you are a reformer, a wizard who champions equality, criticizes the privileges of pure-blood families, and would like to change minds at the Ministry. You have not stormed Nocturne Alley, or uprooted whatever else you disapprove of. But considering the history you've lived through, I understand your cautiousness. Speak plainly, we are not strangers." Loren's frankness pleased Dumbledore. The headmaster laughed quietly for a moment and smoothed his beard. "Never seeking power in practice is its own contribution," he said. "These are things I hope you will take on when the time comes." Then Dumbledore grew serious. "I've been consulting with healers and scholars who study the soul about the Longbottoms. Their minds were twisted by the unforgivable curses. Their memories and consciousness are tangled, like trying to find a single thread in a room full of yarn. The work will be difficult and dangerous." Loren watched the snails wobble along the wet path. He said, "Professor, you should read some Muggle psychology. Consciousness is an amazing thing, more complex than magic. I don't think the Longbottom's problem is ruined souls, crumbled houses. I think their minds blurred and twisted perception and sanity to withstand unbearable pain. They are not ruined, empty houses. They are like jungles grown wild and distorted. You don't need to rebuild every wall. You need to bring a light into the darkness that shows the way." Dumbledore's interest sharpened. "Explain." Loren's fingers brushed the waterline and broke it, sending ripples through the courtyard puddle. "I can use Bloody Mary's hand mirror to open a path into their consciousness, let Neville enter their subconscious, and by using familial love to counter the pain in their memories, wake their sanity from within. Of course, it's dangerous and there are no guarantees," he added. "But it could work," Dumbledore said, eyes brightening. "Love is the greatest magic." The two snails extended their antennae and, as if guided along a newly cleared trail, inched forward steadily. A week later, the end-of-year feast marked the close of term. The feast was held before final exam results, letting the students relax and celebrate without worry. Red and gold Gryffindor banners had been hung across the Great Hall to celebrate the house winning the cup for the second year running. Behind the high table, a huge banner of the Gryffindor lion hung, all majestic pride and roaring color. 260. Return to St. Mungo's. Before the feast begins, let us give a round of applause to Professor Sprout, Professor Snape, and Madame Pomfrey, whose mandrake juice successfully cured all the petrified victims. Headmaster Dumbledore's words were met with thunderous applause. Colin and Justin pushed open the great hall doors and stepped into the light, drawing another roar from the students. As they returned to their house tables, they were swarmed by excited classmates. Ernie Macmillan's questions were the loudest. What does a live basilisk look like? What did it feel like to be petrified? Were you conscious when you were in the hospital wing? Could you hear people talking? Were you hungry, thirsty, bored? To be honest, I'm a bit envious, Ron said, picking up a chicken leg. No classes, no finals. That's not a bad deal, is it? Loren swallowed the baked escargot in his mouth, and faintly, I could let you lie in the hospital wing for a year. Want to try it next term? Ron, mouthful of meat, shook his head violently. Dumbledore waited patiently for the noise to die down, then announced loudly that Gryffindor had once again taken the house cup. The Gryffindor table erupted in cheers. Padma looked up from her Ravenclaw table, remembering what she'd overheard in the Quidditch stands, and found herself glancing toward the high table. Professor McGonagall smiled and raised her goblet frequently in a toast with Professor Flitwick. Dumbledore returned her smile and even nodded when their eyes met. Professor Snape's expression remained unreadable. He seemed to sense Padma's gaze, turned, and then quickly looked away. Padma dismissed the foolish idea that had crossed her mind and turned back to her food. The celebration went on. After the younger students had filled themselves, they ran and shrieked through the hall. Colin squeezed between Harry and Ron, pestering them excitedly for details about the basilisk. That thing ruined my camera. Harry, don't worry. I'll get a new one next term and keep taking your pictures, Colin shouted. Harry's smile grew stiff. The food on his plate seemed tasteless. Justin hurried across from the Hufflepuff table, grabbed Harry's hand, and apologized over and over for having doubted him. Ginny had somehow drifted to the Ravenclaw table and sat chatting with Luna, her ears twitching toward Cho Chang nearby. The faculty at the high table watched the students below with fond smiles, letting the noise bounce off the vaulted ceiling. "This is what makes Hogwarts so endearing," Professor Kettleburn chuckled. "The students are always full of vigor. Sometimes they're even cuter than magical creatures." "Sylvanas, even if you say that, I must still insist you retire. Take some time to enjoy your old bones," Dumbledore said, lifting his goblet to him. "Yes, yes," Kettleburn murmured, nostalgic rather than interested in food. "I still think animals are cuter," Hagrid mumbled around a mouthful of beef stew, and Kettleburn's gaze lingered on the half-giant. Loren had been to a few Hogwarts feasts before, but this was only his second end-of-year banquet. He noticed things he had missed the last time, the graduating students shouting loudest, the first years gawking with wide eyes. Year after year, new batches arrived by boat and left the same way, carrying 7 years' worth of memories with them. When sunlight finally returned to the castle the next morning, final report cards were handed out. Percy, clutching a thick stack of parchments, distributed them with an air of satisfaction. The cards were uniformly marked, "O, outstanding." Loren glanced at his casually, then let it lie over his face, and sank back on the sofa to doze. The sunlight pouring through the windows made sleep feel like the most comfortable thing in the world. Hermione finished reading her own report and glanced toward him. She tiptoed over, lifted the parchment from his face, and noticed his eyelids flutter in the sudden brightness. She covered his eyes with her hand, shielding him gently, then perched on the arm of the sofa to look at his report. A smile broke across her face. "Tied for first," she said softly. Neville, having collected his card from Percy, had skipped straight past the potions grade before he even looked. When he saw the big O next to herbology, his grin nearly split his face. Harry, leaning on tiptoe behind him, squinted and said indignantly, "Snape gave you a P for potions? If he hadn't been standing behind you the whole time during the exam, you'd have got at least an E." "Exactly," Ron agreed, and both of them were pleased with their high marks. Neville, too, seemed content. As Ron said, he beamed, not everything in life can go perfectly. Percy, having finished handing out cards, returned. "Oh, Neville," he announced. "Professor McGonagall says Headmaster Dumbledore would like to see you in his office. Password is Fizzing Whizbees." Neville blinked and fumbled. "Did she say what about?" "No, but don't worry, your grades are very good, so it'll be nothing to be upset about." I understand." Not long after, Neville returned looking shaken. His eyes were red, and he walked toward the sofa where Loren still slept. He opened his mouth, closed it, turned away, then came back again. Hermione, ready to put Loren's report back over his face, looked up and saw Neville pacing. "Neville, are you looking for Loren?" she asked, cheeks flushed, as she gently woke Loren. "Aye," Neville stammered. Loren opened his eyes and saw Neville's expression. Timid joy, hesitant need for confirmation, and a kind of bewildered disbelief. Neville met his gaze and cried out, "Loren, It's true," Loren said. "If you're not sure, try." Neville stood stunned, as bewildered as Harry. Could he really read minds? Loren knew, without thinking, that Dumbledore must have told him something. He sighed. "Don't worry, Neville. The holidays are coming. You'll have an answer soon." "There will be an answer soon," Neville echoed as he left. The sunlight was warm and bright, but Loren couldn't get back to sleep. Hermione murmured, "Why didn't you give him a definite answer?" With Dumbledore involved, Neville would believe it and feel better. "Because I can't guarantee success," Loren said. "To give someone real hope and then take it away, that would be cruel." Soon the whistle of the Hogwarts Express sounded at the gates. "Why are you staying a few more days?" Ron asked, disappointed. "I wanted to play Bertie Bott's Every Flavor Beans with you in the compartment." He pushed his trunk irritably. "Never mind, I won't ask. Loren and Hermione, you two are always so mysterious. Harry and I are used to it." Harry scratched his head. "I don't know what you're planning, but good luck." He took a quill and a strip of parchment, wrote a string of numbers twice, tore it in half, and passed each a piece. Remember to call me at the Dursleys, okay? Sirius might be away this summer. I don't want to spend 2 months only talking to Dudley. Loren and I live next door. One number is enough, Hermione smiled, slipping the scrap into her locket. Harry's expression clouded for a moment. All right, see you next term. Goodbye, called Ron and Harry, hauling their trunks and already laughing as their suitcases seemed to weigh nothing. After they left, Draco emerged from a corner, dragging his similarly light trunk, and bid them a stiff farewell. The storage scales are handy, aren't they? Very convenient, Loren agreed. Have a good summer, Draco added, hesitating over his words, then turning to go. See you next term. Loren and Hermione nodded. Happy holidays. See you next term. Like a great beast settling down, Hogwarts grew quiet, the castle exuding its peculiar stillness. After a time, the train steamed away, and the platform emptied. Professor Flitwick is testing my apparition at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. I'll be done before lunch, Hermione announced, radiating satisfaction. Then wait for me at the school, and we'll apparate home together, Loren said. I'm going to the headmaster's office to find Dumbledore and Neville, and then to St. Mungo's. They split up in the hall, Hermione toward the Forbidden Forest, Loren upstairs to the headmaster's office. Half an hour later, an old man in a white robe with a long beard and 2 young wizards, one plump, one thin, stood before a weathered red brick storefront. A closed for renovation sign hung on the dusty door. The faded name above read, Tau Tau Co. Ltd. The place looked as run down as when Loren had last been there, its window display sparse and forlorn, broken mannequins, wigs askew, clothes that had been out of fashion for a decade. Dumbledore nodded toward the ugliest mannequin and said, Hello, we've come to visit Frank and Alice Longbottom. Neville knew the place well. Loren had been there once. At the nodding, waving mannequin, the 2 children clutched at Dumbledore's robes, and the 3 passed through the glass and into St. Mungo's. Inside the crowded waiting room, the noise hit them all at once. Patients, male and female, young and old, sat on rickety wooden benches. Extra eyes, noses, even trunks and fishy gills showed on faces. Strange sounds issued from strange places, whistles, trumpets, odd gurgles. Healers in green robes moved among them, the St. Mungo's emblem, a cross formed by a wand and a bone, stitched over their hearts. Being in St. Mungo's steadied Neville. Looking at the peculiar but clearly recognized afflictions around him, he tilted his head and said, I always hoped Mum and Dad would have something like this. It's strange, but the healers know what to do. Then you may get your wish today, Loren said softly. You'll see what's wrong with your parents. Dumbledore's sapphire eyes flickered with a complex light, but he did not join their small conversation. Behind the inquiry desk sat a plump blonde witch in green. Principal Dilys Derwent's portrait lifted its eyes and smiled at them from the frame. Dumbledore nodded in return. A notice board showed the floors and wards. First floor, artifact accidents. Second, creature-induced injuries. Third, magical bugs. Fourth, potion and plant poisoning. Fifth, spell damage. Sixth, tier room and shop. Stains marred the wood, but the signs were legible. If I were alone today, I would certainly go to the 6th floor and buy things for the patients, Dumbledore said. But today we should go straight to the ward. He led them to the 5th floor. At the top of the staircase, an old woman in a long green robe and pointed hat stood waiting. Neville saw her and cried, Grandma! Albus, she called, coming forward. She touched Neville's forehead, pulled him behind her, and addressed Dumbledore. This must be the Mr. Morgan you mentioned. Augusta, Dumbledore replied, shaking her hand. Loren inclined his head. Hello, Mrs. Longbottom. We met here last time. Good boy, good boy. Mrs. Longbottom's lips pressed into a thin line. Her face was a map of stern, familiar creases. She had many questions she kept close. After a moment's silence, she said, brisk and businesslike, We don't have time to waste. Let's begin.